Balakand 1. Valmiki and NARAD. Tamas was the river on the banks of which was built the ashram of Valmiki, the great sage. He was famed the world over for his great tapas, for his gurukul which had many disciples learning the sacred lore under him. Once the rishi was sunk in reverie, and to him came NARAD, the divine rishi, NARAD, the son of Brahma, the creator. Watching NARAD's fingers strumming the strings of the veena, Valmiki sat without speaking a word. NARAD asked him what his thoughts were, and the rishi replied, "You are the son of Brahma, and you are like Vayu, the god of wind. You can enter everywhere, even into the minds of men, and know what thoughts there are in the innermost hearts of living beings. You must be knowing what has been teasing me for quite some time now. I wonder if there is, in this world of men, a single individual, a man blessed with all the many good qualities which one can think of." "Tell me what these qualities are," said NARAD, "and I will try and tell you if there is one endowed with all of them, and thus satisfy your curiosity." "Integrity," said Valmiki. "Integrity, bravery, righteousness, gratitude, truthfulness, dedication to one's principles, character without blemish, concern for all living beings, learning, skill, beauty, a pleasing appearance, courage, radiance, ability to keep anger under control, perfect control, a lack of jealousy at all times, undaunted heroism which one can frighten even the celestials." Valmiki paused for a while after enumerating all these many qualities, and then said with a smile, "I know I am expecting perfection in a human being. But I wonder if there is such a person. Is it possible for a single man to have all these qualities? Even gods have not been able to possess them, and how can a human being aspire to perfection? Yet this mind of mine has been aching to know of such a person, hoping that there is a perfect man." NARAD, who knew the past, the present and the future, was very pleased with the speculation of Valmiki, and he replied, "Listen to me carefully. I happen to know of such a man." He looked thoughtful as though he were trying to collect his memories and said, "As you rightly observed, it is very hard to find a single individual endowed with all these glorious qualities which you have enumerated. But I will tell you about one man who can be said to have attained perfection in this world of men. In the line of the Ikshvakus there is a king by name RAAM. He is the man you are looking for. He is unruffled by the sway of the emotions. He is powerful, and he has a very attractive personality. He has charm and, at the same time, he is firm in his mind. He is highly intelligent and just. He has no foes since he has subdued all of them. As for his looks, he is broad-shouldered, with long arms, a wide chest, a large and beautiful forehead, and a very attractive gait. He is neither too tall nor too short. He has large and liquid eyes. He is well versed in the Shastras, and is very pondering on the great truth, beyond the comprehension of all human thought. He is dear to everyone. He is very noble and good, and all gentle people gravitate towards him like the rivers flow continuously towards the ocean. RAAM knows no partiality, and he is ever gentle and pleasant in his speech. All the good and great qualities which you are looking in a man are found in this king who is the son of Kaushalya. In nobility he resembles the mighty ocean, and he is firm in his convictions like the great Himavan. In prowess he is like Narayan, and he is as pleasing to the sight as the moon. If his anger is roused, he will be like the fire which burns up the universe at the end of time. Patient like Mother Earth, he is generous like Kuber. He is like Dharma, the Lord or righteousness in truthfulness, and in short, he is a paragon of all the virtues which adorn the human being." Valmiki, who had been sitting quiet all the while, became greatly excited at the words of NARAD, and his eyes flashed with a great happiness. Loath to interrupt the flow of words from the lips of NARAD, his eyes beseeched the divine rishi to tell him more. Sensing his eagerness, NARAD, with a smile lightening his young face, continued his talk. "Dasharath, the father of RAAM," said NARAD, "was very eager to crown his eldest son RAAM as the Yuvraj of the kingdom, RAAM who was noble, who was the home of all virtues, the great qualities we spoke of just now. The king began to make all preparations for the coronation. His younger wife Kakeyi, however, was against the coronation. With the help of 2 boons which she had been granted long ago, she made the king agree to her stipulations. One of them was the crowning of her son Bharat as the king, and the other was the banishment of Ram to the dreaded Dandak forest. The unfortunate king, bound as he was by his promise, had to conform to her wishes, and he banished Ram to the forest. The noble Prince Ram agreed to go away to please his father and to fulfill the promise of the king. Ram's brother Lakshman, who was born of Sumitra, was devoted to Ram, and he decided to accompany Ram in his exile. Ram had a wife by name Seeta. She was dear to him as his very life. She was the daughter of Janak. Born, as she was, of a noble race, this jewel among women followed her lord Ram even as the star Rohini does the moon. On the banks of the river Ganga dwelt a hunter by name Guha. Ram spent the first night of his exile in Shringabarapura, the capital of the hunter king. After sending the charioteer Sumantra back to Ayodhya, the capital of the Ikshvaka kings, Ram, Lakshman and Sita crossed the river Ganga with the help of Guha. They then arrived at the ashram of Bharadvaj. The rishi advised them to go to the hill by name Chitrakut, and to build a hermitage there. They crossed many coppices and fords and small rivers and finally arrived at the hill by name Chitrakut. Lakshman built a hermitage, and the three of them were dwelling happily there in the midst of so much natural beauty. Even as Ram was approaching Chitrakut, Dasharath, his father, unable to bear the separation from his beloved son Ram, abandoned his mortal frame, and was gathered to his forefathers. Bharat had all the while been with his uncle Yudhishthira, the brother of Kakeyi. Vashisht the royal preceptor sent for him, and when the funeral obsequies were completed, the wise men told Bharat about the danger of a country which was without a ruler, and asked Bharat to take up the reins of the kingdom and rule it as his father had done. Bharat refused to do so. Instead, he made up his mind to go to the forest, meet Ram, and bring him back to Ayodhya. He went to Chitrakut accompanied by his subjects and the ministers and Vashisht. He met Ram and beseeched him to accept the kingdom. He said, "My lord, you are the king, and you must come back and take up the responsibility of ruling the kingdom." But Ram, who was ever famed for granting anyone his wish, was firm in this one instance, and refused to grant Bharat his wish. He would not accept the kingdom since that would falsify his father's promise. Finally, as a compromise, Bharat asked for the sandals of Ram, and told him that he would place them on the throne and rule the kingdom in the name of Ram, as his representative. Ram agreed to it. Bharat took an oath that he would enter Ayodhya only with Ram. He therefore stayed in a small village by name Nandigram, which was on the fringe of the city of Ayodhya. There he stayed dressed in tree bark and deer skin, and with his hair matted even as Ram's and Lakshman's were. He was governing the country, waiting eagerly for the coming of Ram. Ram, in the meantime, felt that he should abandon Chitrakut since the people of Ayodhya knew his whereabouts. Therefore he decided to penetrate into the Dandak. The first event in the Dandak was his slaying of the Rakshas by name Viradha. He then proceeded to the ashrams of Sharabhanga, Sathikshan, Agastya, and the brother of Agastya. Agastya made a gift of the great bow of Indra to Ram. He also gave him a beautiful sword and 2 quivers which were inexhaustible. The rishis in the forest approached Ram with a request. They told him about their being harassed by the Rakshasas who were dwelling in their midst and asked Ram to protect them. Ram listened to them and told them that he would do so. He said that he would destroy all the Rakshasas. It was a solemn promise made by Ram. They went to a spot by name Puntvati. It was on the banks of the river Godavari, and it was beautiful. There Lakshman built an ashram, and they spent a happy time there. By now 13 years had been spent in exile. When they were in Puntvati, Sarpanaka, Rakshasi, who was dwelling in the Janas, then came to Ram and expressed her love for him. Incensed at this, Ram caused her to be disfigured. Lakshman took up his sword and cut off her nose and ears. She went to her brother Kar and complained to him about the insult to herself by 2 mere men. At her instigation Kar, Dushan and Trisheras, with an army made up of 14,000 Rakshasas, accosted Ram. Ram killed all of them single-handed and thus rid the Janas then of all the Rakshasas. Kar and the other 2 were cousins of Ravan, the lord of Lanka. Hearing about the incidents in Janas then, Ravan decided to avenge the deaths of his cousins, and the destruction of the army, and also the insult to Surpanaka. He went to Marich, a Rakshas, for assistance. Marich tried in many ways to convince Ravan of the prowess of Ram, and about the dangers of arousing his anger. But Ravan paid no heed to his words. Prodded as he was by fate, Ravan took Marich with him, and arrived in the neighborhood of the ashram of Ram. With the help of his Maya, at which he was an adept, Marich lured Ram and later Lakshman away from the ashram. And when Sita was alone in the ashram, Ravan carried her away. Jatayu, the king of eagles, was a friend of Ram, and he tried in vain to prevent Ravan from abducting Sita. He was fatally wounded and Ravan went away with the princess. When they came back to the ashram, Ram and Lakshman found it empty. With Sita abducted and with seeing Jatayu who was dying, Ram was beside himself with grief and anguish. He heard about Ravan from the lips of dying Jatayu, and when the eagle died, Ram performed the funeral rites for him as he would for his own father. The two brothers then went southwards in search of Sita. While they were proceeding thus, they were caught in the arms of a gruesome-looking Rakshas by name Kaband. His arms were a yojana long each, and his head was in his stomach. His mouth was wide open to swallow his victims. Kaband was, in reality, the son of Kuber who had been cursed to assume this form. When he was killed by the brothers he regained his celestial form, and returned to the heaven. Before leaving him Kaband told Ram about Shubri, a devotee of Ram who was waiting for the coming of Ram. Kaband also said that on top of the Rishyamukha hill dwelt a Vana by name Sugriv who would help Ram to find Sita. Ram went to the ashram of Shubri, was worshipped by her, and he gave her leave to reach the heavens which she had earned by her tapas. Ram and Lakshman proceeded on their journey and reached the lake known by the name Pampa, and after passing it, they were wandering around at the foot of the hill Rishyamukha. They were accosted by Hanuman, the minister of Sugriv. Hanuman took them to the presence of Sugriv. A great and lasting friendship was formed between these two, Ram and Sugriv, and this was forged by fire which was kindled by the wise Hanuman. Ram recounted to Sugriv about himself and about the misfortune which had befallen him, the abduction of Sita by some Rakshas. Sugriv came out with his story and the unfortunate condition he was in, banished from his city by his brother Vala. Ram promised to kill Vala to please Sugriv. The Vana was dubious about the prowess of Ram, and he recounted the many acts of valor performed by his brother. To assure him of his own superior strength, Ram lifted the skeleton of one Dundub high with the tip of his toe and flung it to a distance of 10 yojanas. And again, with a single arrow he pierced 7 glorious sala trees. Sugriv was ashamed of himself for his lack of faith in Ram and said, "This arrow of yours has pierced the 7 salas, spilt the earth open, and after entering the nether regions it has returned to your quiver. Never before have I seen such valor. Forgive me for doubting you." They went to Kishkindha, the capital city of Vala. Sugriv called out to the great warrior Vala and challenged him to come out and fight with him. Ram killed Vala with a single arrow and established Sugriv on the throne of the dead Vala. Sugriv then summoned his entire army and dispatched his men to all the 4 quarters to search for Sita. Hanuman, accompanied by Angad, the son of Vala, went towards the south. There, directed by Sampati, the eagle king who was the brother of Jatayu, Hanuman crossed the sea, which was 100 yojanas wide. He reached the island by name Lanka. There, in the king's pleasure garden by name Vamanvan, Hanuman found Sita, who was kept there as a captive. Thinking only of Ram, the princess was a picture of woe. Hanuman announced himself to her, gave her the signet ring which Ram had sent and comforted her with words of encouragement. He gave her news about Ram and Lakshman, and he told her that Ram, assisted by Sugriv and his army, would soon arrive in Lanka and rescue her from Ravan. Hanuman then destroyed the ASHVAMEDH. Ravan sent his army to capture him. But 5 of his commanders and 7 of their sons, as also the brave Akshay, the son of Ravan, were killed by Hanuman. Indrajit, another son of Ravan, came and he dispatched the Brahma Astra at Hanuman. The Vana did not want to insult the great Brahma, and so he allowed himself to be bound by the Astra. He was then taken to the court of Ravan. Thereafter he burnt the city of Lanka, and returned to the presence of Ram. He carried with him the good tidings that Sita was alive, and that she was a captive of Ravan. Accompanied by Sugriv, Ram came to the shores of the sea. When the Lord of the Seas would not make way for him, and his army, Ram was highly incensed and threatened to burn up the entire sea. The king of the waters appeared in front of Ram, and asked him to build a bridge across the sea, which would take them to Lanka. Accordingly, Nal, the architect, built the bridge. Crossing the seas, Ram went to Lanka, killed Ravan and rescued Sita. However, he spoke harsh words to her. Unable to bear the stinging insults, Sita entered fire. Agni, the god of fire, brought her to Ram out of the flames and told Ram that he should accept her since she was without any taint. The world above and the world of men praised the prowess of Ram. They celebrated the great achievements of Ram. After crowning Vibhishan, the brother of Ravan, as the king of Lanka, Ram made up his mind to turn his steps homewards. With the blessings of the Devas, the Vanas, who had died in the war, came back to life, and there was great rejoicing. In the celestial chariot by name Pashupak, Ram, along with his friends, proceeded towards Ayodhya. He went to the ashram of Bharadvaj first to pay his respects to him, and from there he sent Hanuman to Bharat to inform him of his return. Ram then went to Nandigram with Sugriv. In Nandigram he was reunited with his brothers Bharat and Shatrughan. After getting rid of his matted locks, Ram assumed the garments of a king, and was crowned king of Kosala. The people were thrilled with the return of Ram, and there was great rejoicing in the city of Ayodhya. Ram rules the kingdom righteously, and there is not a breath of adharma in the rule of Ram. After performing 100 ASHVAMEDHs, Ram will reach the heavens. He will establish dharma on the earth. He will rule for 11,000 years before he leaves the earth. One who hears this tale of Ram will be assured of a place in heaven. Having recounted the story of Ram to Valmiki, Narad took leave of him, and went away from his ashram. 2. The coming of Brahma. After the departure of Narad, Valmiki was sitting quiet for a while, thinking on the glorious personage, Ram, and his mind was dwelling on Ram. The rishi suddenly realized that it was time for him to perform his morning worship, and so, accompanied by his disciple, he went to the banks of the river Tamasa, which was very near the more famous Ganga. He saw a spot where the water was pellucid, and he stopped in his tracks. He spoke to his disciple and said, "Son, the water here is clear and pure like the mind of a good man. Look how beautiful it is. I have decided to perform my ablutions here, in this spot. Place the water pot here, on the ground, and give me the tree bark." The disciple did as he was bid. With the Valkala in his hand, the rishi looked all around him, his eyes pleased with the beauty of the surroundings. He took a few steps here and there and smiled to himself as he saw how lavish Mother Nature had been in her bounty in this particular place. Looking up at a tree, the rishi saw a couple of krunka birds. They were singing happily in their sweet and melodious voices, and they were very much in love with each other. They were making love, and Valmiki's eyes rested on them with tolerant amusement. Even as he was looking, he saw the male krunka fall down, hit by an arrow. Valmiki saw a hunter, sinful and cruel, who had just shot an arrow at the bird. The bird was lying dead on the ground, drenched in blood, and the female krunka was wailing piteously, and her joyous song of a moment ago had turned into a mournful dirge. The small bird with its red head was full of sorrow. Valmiki saw the cruel act of the hunter, and its sad consequence, and his heart was filled with compassion. He knew what an adharmi the hunter had been, and he spoke in an impassioned voice, "You have been merciless in your action. You killed one of these two birds when they were making love. Your act is unforgivable. You will therefore be denied the long span of life granted to man." Valmiki then turned away from him, and left the spot in a hurry. His heart was still full of sadness, and he thought over the incident long after he had gone away from there. He kept remembering the words he had spoken to the hunter, and he repeated them in his mind. He told his disciples, "I was very sad because of what had happened to the krunka birds. And I spoke some words. Born as they were out of my sorrow, these words are so arranged that they follow a meter. They seem to form a sloka which can even be sung to the accompaniment of the drone of the veena. I am amazed at the sloka which I seem to have composed. The disciple learnt the sloka, and when he repeated it there was wonder at the formation of it. Valmiki then entered the river and performed the ablutions, the worship of the sun, and all the daily rituals. But his mind was all the while dwelling on the sloka. They returned to the ashram, the rishi in the lead, and the disciple carrying the water pot filled now with the pure water from the tamasa. Valmiki entered the ashram and, with his other disciples, pursued with them the study of the sacred lore. While he was thus engaged he found the hermitage filled suddenly with a heavenly glow. He looked up and saw Lord Brahma himself standing there. He got up with a feeling of awe and stood with folded palms. He could not speak a word, so overcome was he with the suddenness of it all. He then worshipped the Creator in the proper manner, fell at his feet, and offered Aragyapadya, and a befitting seat. Brahma honored him by accepting his homage, and the seat offered to him. After seating himself at the command of Brahma, Valmiki sat silent, and his mind was pondering on the event of the river bank. He could not still grasp the cruelty of a hunter who could deliberately kill the happy bird without any cause whatsoever. Again the sloka came to his mind, and he repeated it to himself silently. Brahma smiled at him and divining his thoughts said, "Do not wonder any more about the words you spoke. It is a sloka and there is no doubt about it. I willed you to speak thus. I want you to compose a great poem in the same meter. Relate the story of Ram. Narad told you the story of Ram, who is famed the world over for his righteousness, for his nobility, his intelligence, his courage. I will grant this boon to you, you will be able to know what passed in the minds of every one of them, Ram, Lakshman, Seeta, and the many participants in the strange tale. In short, there will be nothing which is a secret withheld from you. You will know everything which happened and every thought in the mind of each of them. In this single kavya which you are going to compose there will not be a single word of untruth spoken. I command you to relate to the world of men the sacred story of Ram set in the same meter in which you compose the sloka you are thinking about. The ASHVAMEDH meter. The world will be the richer for the composition of yours. So long as the story of Ram is remembered in the world, you will also be remembered. Your name will be immortal because of what you are going to do. Brahma vanished from the presence of Valmiki after he had spoken these words. Valmiki was still in a daze, and so were his disciples. They repeated the sloka again, and with each repetition the wonderment grew. 3. Valmiki composes the great poem. Valmiki touched water to purify himself. He then spread darba grass on the floor and sat on it facing the east. He closed his eyes and went into a deep trance. He thought of the task assigned to him, and he told himself, "As the Lord has commanded, I will compose the poem in the meter which came into my mind and in the sloka form. It will be the story of Ram and his achievements, and I will name it the Ramayan." The more he thought about it, the clearer became his vision and his intellect, and he could see with his mind's eye all the many events which had taken place. He could visualize the old King DASHARATH with his wives around him, looking at his 4 sons with eyes filled with joy and pride. And he saw Ram and Lakshman with Seeta in the Dandak forest. It was as clear to him as the palm of his hand. The great rishi related to the world the glorious story of Ram, and the poem was full of noble thoughts and noble deeds like the ocean is full of rare and costly gems. Valmiki remembered the manner in which Narad had spoken of Ram, and in the same strain he composed the kavya. It was made up of beautiful sounding words, words which were pleasing to the mind as well as to the ears, which were faultless in their formation, and their meaning was as clear as the waters of a placid lake in the Himalaya. In a short while he was able to compose the poem. He had completed the epic Ramayan, which spoke of the story of Ram, of the killing of Ravana. There were 24,000 verses, slokas, in the kavya, and the rishi was pleased with what he had done. He divided the kavya into 6 sections. 500 chapters were needed to relate the story in its completeness. After the completion of the kavya, Valmiki was wondering about the proper person, who would be able to recite the poem and thus propagate it. Even as he was thinking on it, two youngsters, Kusa and Lava, came to his presence, prostrated before him, and took the dust of his feet. The youngsters, who were princes, had been with the rishi to learn the sacred lore. They had very attractive voices, and since they were twins, their voices blended together very well. To them Valmiki taught the kavya by name Ramayan. They learnt it and they sang it to the accompaniment of the veena. They sang like Gandharvas. These two handsome, sweet-spoken boys with their large eyes were the sons of Ram. After they had learnt the entire kavya, the youngsters began to travel from ashram to ashram, singing all the while the story of Ram. Once, Ram was performing the great yugya by name ASHVAMEDH, the horse sacrifice. The young princes, dressed in tree bark and deer skin, went to the spot, and there, in the midst of the many rishis assembled there, they sang the Ramayan. The rishis listened, with tears in their eyes, to this glorious tale filled with all the 9 emotions which a kavya should have. And they praised the youngsters. The fame of these two young boys was the only topic of conversation among the rishis and others who had heard them, and the news reached the ears of Ram, the king. He saw them too with their veenas, and he heard their voices from a distance. His curiosity was soon kindled, and he sent for them. They came to his palace, and he welcomed them. In the council hall was seated Ram, surrounded by his ministers and his dear brothers. He had assumed the garb proper for one performing the yugya, and he was charmed by the looks of the youngsters. He spoke to his brothers and said, "They glow with a radiance which is unearthly, and their voice is heavenly too. Let us listen to them singing." The song, which was accompanied by the hypnotic drone of the veenas, filled the hall. As the tale progressed, Ram, who was seated on the throne, descended unobtrusively from their step by step and sat on the floor with the others, listening to the glorious kavya. He sat spellbound, and he listened as though it were the story of someone else and not himself. Tears were flowing from his eyes when he sat down to listen to the Ramayan. This story concerns the great line of king whose founder was Manu, and which has been immortalized by the name of Ikshvaku, the son of Manu, and later, by Sagar and others. Thus began the kavya, and Ram sat and listened as though he were figure carved out of a block of marble. 4. Dasharath and his grief. There was a country by name Kosala, and on the outskirts of the country flowed the river Sarayu. The land belonged to the Ikshvakus, the descendants of Manu, one of the Prajapatis. Kosala was beautiful, and it was famed for its beauty, the richness of its soil, its luscious greenery, the abundance of its crops, its wealth, and its prosperity. The kings of the solar race who had always ruled it were famed the world over for their valor and for their righteousness. The capital of the land of Kosala was Ayodhya. Tradition had it that Manu, the great lawgiver, had created the city. It was a wondrous city with flowering trees, and with wide beautiful roads where the king rode every day. The roads were well laid out, and the royal pathway was ever beautiful with flowers and scented water sprinkled on it all the time. Ayodhya was like Amaravati, the city of Indra. Ayodhya was ruled by Dasharath, even as Amarvati was by Indra. Dasharath had earned for himself the name Rajarshi since he had always been a God-fearing man. He was a wise king. He had charmed his subjects by his good nature. As befitted a scion of the race of Ikshvaku, he had earned the praise of all the many rishis and good people for his prowess coupled with gentleness. He had performed all the yugnas which a king had to perform, and he was a king beloved by all. The people were happy and contented. None of them was jealous, and not one was avaricious. They were all rich, and they spoke nothing but the truth. Everyone was wealthy, and everyone was noble. There was no meanness, no lust, and even ugliness was absent. The people were all well-read, and no one was an atheist. There was no unhappiness in the mind of even one of them. Such a good king was Dasharath, the descendant of Ikshvaku. Dasharath had 8 ministers who were well versed in the art of advising the king in matters of importance. They were highly intelligent, great diplomats, and they were all the time interested in the well-being of their king and his subjects. The ministers were Dhurti, Jayanta, Vijay, Siddharth, Arthsadaka, Asoka, Mantrapala, and Sumantra. The king also had great priests and rituals. The chief of them were VASHISHT and VAMADEV. They were great scholars and they were famed for their learning, for their pride and self-respect, for their self-control, their penance. They were glorious men who had thoughts only for the good of others, the king and his subjects. The king's ministers were so efficient that there was nothing which escaped their notice. They knew about the happenings in all the neighboring countries. The treasury of the king was ever full, and so was the granary. Such a great king, who had everything he could wish for, was not perfectly happy. He had no son to make him happy. The line of the Ikshvakus threatened to terminate with him since he had no one to succeed him. King Dasharath was unhappy because of this, and this sorrow ate into his vitals day and night. And as he grew older, his sorrow increased too. One day, while thinking on this, the king thought, "Why should I not perform the yugna by name ASHVAMEDH? I have been told that it is a rewarding yugna. Perhaps my prayers may be answered if I perform the horse sacrifice." He called for a meeting of his counselors. When they had all come, the king asked them to be seated, and sent Sumantra to fetch the rishis who surrounded him during the performance of religious rites. He said, "Sumantra, bring to me the revered gurus, VASHISHT, VAMADEV, Sunyagna, Jabali, Kashyap and their disciples too." Within a short while Sumantra brought all of them to the great council hall. The king received them with all due honor, and after seating them properly, paying attention to their status, the king spoke to them. "Surrounded as I am by the wealth of this land and by many beautiful objects of pleasure, still, my mind is sorely troubled by sorrow. I have no son, and that makes me unhappy. I feel that the performing of the ASHVAMEDH may be an answer to my prayers. This is just a thought that has occurred to me. It is up to all of you to weigh it carefully and tell me if I have thought right." They approved of his suggestion and said, "O king, this desire of yours to perform the ASHVAMEDH for the purpose of continuing the glorious line of the Ikshvakus is indeed commendable. That you should have thought of it is, in itself, a sign that your wishes will be granted. It is but right that we should hasten and make preparations for the yugna to be performed. Let us, from now, collect the materials for it. The horse should be found. Let the Yugnasala be built on the northern side of the river Sarayu." The king was very pleased with the spontaneous approval of those assembled in the hall. With his eyes wide open with joy he spoke to his ministers, "Take the advice of my acharyas, and make all the arrangements. Construct the Yugnasala on the northern banks of the Sarayu, as has been suggested. All the rituals must be performed properly. Any lapse will cause severe repercussions on all of us. Be very careful to listen to the biddings of the mentors, VASHISHT and the others." "We will obey you and the great ones," said the ministers, and the great hall emptied itself slowly. There was a strange glow of happiness on the face of the king. Something inside him seemed to assure him that he would be blessed with a son, and, with that thought uppermost in his mind, he entered the inner apartments and told his wives about his decision. When he was alone in his chambers, came to the king his charioteer Sumantra. He said, "My lord, I remembered suddenly something which I had heard long ago. I thought it but right that I should come to you immediately with the information I have. The news is very ancient, and so it had slipped from my memory till now. But when you spoke of the yugna, I remembered it. Many years ago, the famous rishi by name Sanatkumara had spoken about the birth of your son in the presence of several rishis. He said, Kashyap, the revered sage, has a son by name Vibhandaka. He will be the father of Rishi Ashringa. This son of Vibhandaka will live in the forest with his father. He will not know any other human being, and he will look to his father for the smallest action which he has to perform. He will be innocent in the ways of the world. In course of time a king will be ruling the country by name Anga. His name will be Romapada. Because of a slight misdeed of the king his country will suffer. A terrible famine will visit the country of Anga, and the king will ask the advice of holy men as to how he can pacify the gods and bring rain to the country. And the holy men will say, O king, if the son of the sage Vibhandaka is brought to the country, rain will follow in his wake. The young man is called Rishyashringa, and if you bring him to your country, and give your daughter Shanta to him in marriage, there will be an end to the dread famine. The king will wonder as to how this can be achieved. He will request his wise ministers and preceptors in his court to go to the forest to bring the young sage. But the anger of Vibhandaka is too well known, and no one will have the courage to go. They will advise the king to send the courtesans of the palace to the forest, and they will succeed where others are afraid to venture. Rishyasringa will later preside over a yagna which will be performed by Dasharath, and because of this, the king will be the father of sons. Sumantra continued, "My lord, if you should, with the permission of Guru Vashisht, approach the Rishi Rishyasringa and beseech him to perform a yagna for you, the prophecy of Sanakumara is certain to come true. Let me assure you that Sanakumara has said that you will be the father of 4 sons who will be valiant, and who will be famed the world over. Please go to the kingdom of Anga, and do not hesitate or delay." 5. The ASHVAMEDH Yagna. King Dasharath spoke to Vashisht and Vamdev about the words of Sanakumara, which had been repeated to him among them during the performance of the yagna. The king, therefore, accompanied by a large army, and by his chief ministers and preceptors, began the journey to Anga, and, after traveling through forests and several countries, arrived at the city where Romapada lived. Hearing about the coming of the great emperor of Kosala, Romapada hurried out of his city, and went to the city gates to welcome Dasharath with great enthusiasm. The 2 kings greeted each other with great affection, and together, they went to the presence of Rishyasringa. The Rishi was glowing like a flame. The king of the Kosala fell at his feet, and honored him. Romapada told him about the great friendship which had existed between himself and King Dasharath. They spent 7 days together happily, and on the 8th day Dasharath told his friend, "I have a boon to ask of you, my friend. I want you to allow your daughter and her husband, the great Rishi, to come to my kingdom for a while. This is to help me achieve something for which I have been praying for the last so many years." He then told Romapada about the yagna which he was planning to perform. Dasharath now approached Rishyasringa and requested him to preside over the function. "So be it," said the Rishi, and went with Dasharath to Ayodhya. The friends parted after the affectionate farewells. Dasharath sent a host of messengers in advance asking them to prepare the city for the arrival of the illustrious guest. When the royal entourage arrived in the city, the streets had been decorated with banners and flags and flower garlands, and the entire city had a festive look. The king took the Rishi and his wife to his antahpura, and made them stay in the apartments set apart for them. When he had brought them to his city, the king felt that he had already achieved the goal for which he was striving. The season Vasanth had now made its appearance. The rivers were filled with pure and sweet waters, and the trees were covered with fresh green leaves. Dasharath approached the honored guest Rishyasringa and requested him to undertake the performance of the yagna. The Rishi said, "Now that the season Vasanth is here, I feel the time is perfect for the beginning of the yagna. You should instruct the ministers and your servants to collect the materials for the yagna, and you can now send the sacrificial horse for its sojourn round the entire Bharatvarsha." The king listened to him with respectful attention, and he instructed Sumantra to take care of all the details. He sent him first to fetch his guru Vashisht, accompanied by Vamdev, Sayagna, and the others. They came, the masters of all the Vedas and all the sacred lore. Honoring them and placing them on their seats, the king spoke in his characteristic humble manner, "You know only too well how much I have been pained at the thought that I have no son to continue the mighty line of the Ikshvakus. I have told you about the prophecy that my sorrow will be at an end if I perform the yagna with the great Rishyasringa to preside over it. I now stand humbly in front of all of you, asking you to grant me permission to commence the yagna and to bless me." Vashisht and the others were pleased with the humility of the king, and knowing what a righteous man he was, they were happy that he was about to perform the yagna which would be the crowning glory of his life. Along with Rishyasringa, they began to make all the preparations for the yagna. And they told the king, "We can assure you that the yagna will be performed without any hindrance, and your wishes will certainly be granted." On the northern bank of the Saraya, the Yugnasala was soon constructed, and the materials necessary for such an elaborate yagna were assembled methodically and very quickly. The seasons passed quickly, and once again Vasanth heralded its approach by the fresh green buds on the branches of the barren trees. The very air seemed to breathe more freely, and there was happiness in the city, and in the heart of the king and his queens since the yajna was due to begin. Dasharath took the dust of the feet of Vashisht and the others and spoke to his guru, "My lord, you have been my preceptor. You have been like a father to me since you were the one to initiate me into the great Gayatri. It is up to you to make this yajna successful and make me happy." Attended by all the kings of Bharatvarsha, the yajna was performed without a single fault, and the ASHVAMEDH yajna was drawing to a close. The king then requested Rishyashranga to help him perform the yajna, by name Putrakam, which would grant him the son he desired. The rishi pondered for a moment and then said, "There is a certain rite, which is described in detail in the Atharva Veda. I happen to know all about it, and I will perform it for you." The Putrakam yajna was begun at an auspicious moment, and the heavenly host assembled in the skies to receive their share of the Havas. 6. The Devas in distress. While the ASHVAMEDH was in progress, the Devas led by Indra went to Brahma, the creator. They said, "My lord, we are sorely distressed and only you can help us." Brahma wanted to know what was troubling them, and they said, "We are unable to bear the valor of Ravan. He has been harassing us no end, and we have reached a point when we can bear it no longer. Your gracious self has granted him boons which have made him powerful, so powerful that we have to behave like his menial slaves. Because he has been favored by you, we have to suffer the many atrocities he has been committing. But then, my lord, we have reached the limit of endurance. You must devise for us some means of escape from Ravan and his persistent ill-treatment of us. He frightens all the three worlds, and he has been wanting to insult me in my Amaravati. Yakshas, Gandharvas and Rishis are all scared of him and his cruelty. The sun is afraid to glow too brightly lest Ravan should punish him. Vayu does not blow too hard since he is in great fear of the Asura king. When his eyes rest on it, even the sea with its ever-rolling waves come to a standstill. You have granted him such a powerful boon that he cannot be killed by any of us. It is up to you to think of some method by which his destruction can be brought about." Brahma listened to them and said, "You are right. I have granted him immunity from the hands of Devas, Danavas, Rakshasas, Gandharvas, Yakshas, and so you are all helpless." In his arrogance, however, Ravan did not deem it worthy of himself to ask immunity from the hands of a mere man. And that is how he will be killed by a man. When they were talking thus, there came to their presence Narayan, the Lord of Lords, Narayan with the Shankha and Chakra. He was borne by Garud and seated on Garud with his golden silk glowing softly. Narayan looked like the sun surmounting a cloud. Brahma and the Devas were overwhelmed by the coming of Lord Narayan, and they worshipped him with folded palms. They said, "Please protect us from suffering. Protect the world from evil. We look to you for succor. We do not have to tell you what is worrying us since you have come to us with the sole purpose of helping us and the entire universe. You will be born as a man, we gather to destroy Ravan." Narayan stood smiling and looked at them as though he were asking them to continue. Brahma said, "My lord, the good king Dasharath of the Surya Vamsa is performing the yajna by name Putrakam, and it is being presided over by the sage Rishyashranga. Dasharath has 3 wives. If I may make a humble suggestion, please make us happy by being born as the son of Dasharath. It has been prophesied that he will be the father of 4 sons, and all the 4 sons will be the amshas of you. Your avatar is essential for the good of mankind and for the good of the heavens. You and only you, my lord, will be able to vanquish Ravan. He is too powerful for anyone else." Narayan listened to the words of Brahma and said, "Have no fear. I have made up my mind to be born in the world of men. I will destroy this tyrant Ravan with his entire clan, and I have but this one purpose to fulfill when I descend into the world. After killing him, I will rule the world for 11,000 years before coming back to my abode." Narayan had thought over this problem of the avatar he had to undertake to save the world from Ravan. He had been wondering as to who was worthy enough to be his father, and he knew that Dasharath, the ever-righteous, who was performing the Putrakam yajna, would be his father. He told the Devas and Brahma about his decision, and they were overjoyed. A few more years and their sorrow would be at an end. They prostrated before him and praised him, and his glory in words full of adoration. Narayan said, "To assist me in my mission you should all be born in the world of men too. Ravan has forgotten to ask for immunity from monkeys and bears also. I would, therefore, like you all to be born as monkeys and help me when the time comes." 7. The birth of Ram. The Putrakam Yagna was almost drawing to a close. Everyone was watching, and all of a sudden, the fire seemed to burn with an unearthly glow. Out of the fire rose a divine form. He was dark and he was clad in crimson silk. His hair was tawny, golden, like the mane of the lion. He was wearing ornaments made of golden and set with precious stones. He was like the sun in radiance, and his arms were decked with bracelets of gold. A chandrahara adorned his immense chest, and his smile was as soft and charming as the radiance of the moon. The entire Yugnasala was illuminated by his presence. The king looked at him and stood with his palms folded. He saw that the divine being held in his hands a golden bowl with a silver covering. The celestial form spoke to the king in the midst of everyone. He said, "I am a messenger from the Creator, Brahma. I have been commanded by the gods to hand you this vessel filled with payasa. Give it to your queens and they will bear you the sons for whom you have aching since so many years." The king prostrated before the divine being and accepted the bowl of payasa with great reverence. When he had taken it in his hands, the divine being blessed him and vanished from his presence. The yagna had come to a glorious conclusion, and the rishis blessed the king and asked him to go into the inner chambers and distribute the payasa to the queens. The king went to Kaushalya, the eldest of the queens, and told her, "Look, my queen, the gods have answered our prayers and a son is to be born to you." And so saying, he gave half the payasa to her and asked her to partake of it. He then gave half of what was left to Sumitra and half of what was left to Kaikeyi, the youngest queen. Seeing that there was still some left, he gave this again to Sumitra, and there was great joy in the hearts of the queens and that of the king. The Devas, after receiving their shares of the havas, went back to their abodes. The yagna had been completed and the citizens followed the king and the rishis into the city of Ayodhya. The kings who had attended the yagna went back to their kingdoms after having been honored by the king. Rishis from different parts of the world returned to their ashrams after taking part in the two yagnas. Sage Rishyashringa, accompanied by his wife Shanta, went back to the kingdom of Anga. The king Dasharath was happy in the anticipation of the births of the children. He felt that he was a god and not a human being, so great was his happiness. The month of Chaitra was once again heralding its approach. Vasanth made its appearance felt by the pleasant breeze which was wafted across the ponds filled with lotuses, and by the trees which were clad in soft fresh green. The month was Chaitra. It was the fortnight when the moon was waxing Shuklapaksh, and it was the auspicious positions. The Lagna was Karkataka, and the planet Guru was rising with the moon. The star was Punarvasu. The Lord of Lords had assumed the form of a human being for the good of mankind, and was born as the son of Kaushalya. Kaushalya glowed with radiance like Uddi did when Indra was born to her. When the next star Pushya appeared, under the Meena Lagna was born a son to Kaikeyi. The gentle Sumitra gave birth to twins when the next star appeared, the star Ashlesha. The four sons of King Dasharath were all the Amshas of Narayan, and Kaushalya's son was Narayan himself. There was joy and nothing but joy in the hearts of all the people in Ayodhya. The great King Dasharath, who had been childless, was now the father of 4 sons, and great were the rejoicings in the country of Kosala. When the children were born, divine instruments made music in the heavens, and the Gandharvas sang and danced out of happiness. They danced and they sang because soon, very soon, their woes would be at an end, since Ravan would be killed. Flowers rained on the divine children. The city of Ayodhya was dressed in her best. All the people were thronging to the palace gates. Music and dancing and various expressions of joy were to be found wherever people gathered. It was like Indra's festival for them, and the streets were filled with men and women and children dressed in their finery. The king gave away gold and gifts of cows to Brahmins and others. 11 days passed after the sons were born to the king. It was the day when the children should be named. The preceptor VASHISHT named KAUSHIK'S son as RAAM. The son of Kakeyi was named Bharat, and Sumitra's two sons were named Lakshman and Shatrugna. After the ceremony had been completed, the king performed the Jatakarma and other rites associated with a new-born child. The children grew up like the moon during Shukla Paksh. Ever since they were born, ever since they were children, Lakshman, who was very beautiful and gentle, became greatly attached to Ram. Ram too was extremely fond of Lakshman. It seemed as though Lakshman was Ram himself, as though his very life had taken up a form, and was moving about with the name Lakshman. Ram would not go to sleep unless Lakshman was placed by his side and fed with the same milk and rice. And later, when they grew up, whenever Ram went out to hunt, Lakshman had to be by his side with his bow and arrows. Even as Lakshman was dear to Ram, Shatrugna, his twin, became the alter ego of Bharat. King Dasharath was in the seventh heaven of happiness, surrounded as he was by his four sons, who were all handsome, strong, powerful, righteous, respectful to their father and mothers, and their guru, their Kulaguru, who had taught them the sacred lore, sage VASHISHT. They were heroes, all four of them, and their learning was great, taught as they were by the great VASHISHT himself. They were well versed in the art of fighting like all Kshatriya princes, and they were all very humble and very soft-spoken. They were proficient in riding on the elephant, on the horse, and in driving a chariot. They were all four of them good archers, and they were very fond of their father. Of the four, Ram was the favorite of his father. He was as sweet, beautiful and gentle as the full moon, and his father was inordinately fond of Ram. And Ram was ever engaged in pleasing his father in every way. The princess were like lions among men, and the king was extremely proud of his sons. They were now nearing the age of 16, and Dasharath was the happiest man on the earth, surrounded as he was by these four sons. 8. VISHVAMITRA comes to Dasharath. The sons of the king were now grown up. They were nearing 16 and entering manhood. As was the custom, 16 was the age when a young man was to be married, and accordingly, the king thought of it. The king Dasharath was wondering as to who the bride of Ram should be. Since Ram was the favorite of son, the king could think only of Ram, and his mind was ever thinking of the many ways and means of pleasing Ram. Ram, on his part, thought of nothing else but making his father happy in every way. The kinship between them was so great that everyone in the palace, or even Ayodhya, knew about it. One day in the council hall, the king spoke to his ministers about the subject uppermost in his mind, the marriage of Ram and his brothers. Even as he was thinking thus, there arrived at the doorsteps of the king the sage Vishvamitra. He accosted the doorkeepers and said, "Go and announce to the king about my arrival. I am Kaushik, the son of Gadi. People call me Vishvamitra." The name was so well known that even the doorkeepers knew about him. They were greatly excited and, with hurried steps, went to the presence of the king. Entering the council hall, they rushed to the king and told him about the arrival of Vishvamitra. The king was greatly pleased that such an illustrious rishi should have come to see him. He got up from the throne and, accompanied by his preceptors, he went to receive the rishi. Padya in hand, Dasharath stood before the guest and washed his feet. He then offered arugya and other prescribed objects used for worshipping such guests. Accepting the welcome of the king with grace, and with a smile, Vishvamitra entered the palace of the king. He made the conventional inquiries about the kingdom, about the subjects, about the welfare of the people, and in return, Dasharath spoke about the ashram of the rishis, his tapas, and the welfare of the inmates of the ashram. When the formalities were over, Vishvamitra paid his respects to VASHISHT and the others. He accepted the seat offered to him. The king then spoke to Vishvamitra. He said, "Your coming is like a godsend to me, like the divine nectar to a human being. Like rainwater to one who is thirsty, like the birth of a son to a man and his good wife, like the finding of a treasure to one who has lost his entire wealth. I am indeed thrilled at the coming of a great personage like your gracious self. Can it be possible that I will be granted the privilege of doing something for you? Something to please you? That a Brahmarshi like you should have come to me on your own, means some great good fortune to me. With the grace of the Lord above, and with the blessings of men like you, I am in a position to offer the entire earth to you if you are so inclined. Please let me know if I can do anything for you." The rishi was pleased with the devotion, affection and humility of Dasharath. He said, "I am not surprised at your words. Born as you are in the line of the Ikshvakus and having the great Vashisht as your guru, it is but natural for you to speak such words. Only men like you will carry out what they have promised. I have, indeed, come to ask a favor of you. I will give you the background. I have taken the Diksha for a yagna. It has to be completed. But I am not able to do so. 2 Rakshasas who are able to assume what shape they will, are proving to be a hindrance to my yagna. They are extremely skillful in fighting the Maya type of warfare, fighting without being seen. And they rain blood and flesh and such unclean objects into the Yugnasala, and on the platform itself where I perform the yagna. All my endeavors to perform the yagna have gone waste, and I have come away from the spot without finishing the yagna. The yagna itself is of such a nature that there is no place for anger in my mind during the performing of it. I am not able to curse them, and I have to hold back my anger. I have come to you for help so that I can complete the yagna." "Tell me, my lord," said Dasharath. He was greatly excited. He had fought on the side of Indra when there was war in the high heavens between the Devas and the Asuras, and the king from the earth had been able to assist Indra during the war. That was when he was granted the boon that he would be able to drive his chariot in all the 10 directions. The king was eager to hear more. "Tell me how I can help you," asked the king. "I want you to give me Ram, your eldest son." "Ram, that charming youngster who is a great warrior," said Vishvamitra. Before the king could put in a word he said, "I will protect him, you need have no fear of that. This young man is sure to destroy those Rakshasas. I am certain of that. Have no doubt that this will mean nothing but great good fortune for your son. He will be famed in the 3 worlds for this act of valor, and I predict nothing but good for your son to follow in the wake of this act. The 2 Rakshasas will not be able to withstand Ram's powerful arrows. And again, Ram and only Ram is capable of destroying them. They are eaten up with pride, and they have come to the end of their lives. Dasharath, do not let your fatherly affection make you hesitate in granting me my boon. The yagna is for 10 days and only 10 days. The evil ones are destined to be killed by Ram, and you can rest assured that they are dead. Already. I know Ram, I know his true nature. I know him and his unswerving devotion to truth. These great rishis led by VASHISHT also know the truth about him. If you desire fame in this world and a great future in the next, you must give Ram to me for these 10 days. If you do but look at your ministers, you can see that they are wanting you to grant me my wish. Dasharath thought of the youth of his beloved son Ram, and to his mind came the dreadful forms of the Rakshasas, who could assume what form they chose, and who were Mayavas. He fell down senseless and for a while, for the duration of a muhurta, he was like that. He regained consciousness and then said, "My lord, please be merciful. My Ram, my child with the eyes like the lotus is hardly 16 years old. I am not able to imagine him fighting with Rakshasas you speak of. I am an old veteran in the art of fighting. My entire army is at your service, my lord. I will accompany you, and with my army to assist me I will fight with the Rakshasas. I have fought before in the war with the DEVAS when the Devas were harassed by them, and I am sure I can vanquish these 2 troublemakers. They are able to use astras, and I will be able to give them good fight. I will protect your yagna, and help you to bring it to a successful conclusion." Please do not ask Ram to face the Rakshasas. His education is hardly over and he is not strong enough to know how fierce the proposed fight will be. As for me, even if an hour passes without seeing my beloved child, my eyes become blurred with tears, and I feel as though my very life is ebbing away from me. Please do not ask me to send my Ram with you. If you insist on Ram coming with you, then let me also come along with my army. Ram is my very life. After so many years of childlessness, he has been granted to me, and he is very dear to me. I have 4 sons, but Ram is most dear to me, as is well known the world over. Tell me about the Rakshasas. Who are they? How do they acquire so much power? Who protect them? Where do they come from? Vishvamitra said, in the line of the famed Pulasatya is born a Rakshas by name Ravan. He is a very powerful warrior, and a brave fighter. He has pleased Brahma with his penance, and has obtained boons from the Creator. He is now bent on persecuting rishis, and all good people. He has defeated Kuber, his half-brother in battle, and has snatched from him the Pushpak, a chariot which can fly in the air. Ravan is the son of Vishravas, and he is famed in all the 3 worlds. These 2 Rakshasas, Marich and Subahu, are his henchmen. They are bent on doing harm to people like me who are bent on tapas and actions which spell good for the world. Ram has to rid the world of them. The king's expression was piteous when he heard about the Rakshasas. He said, "Unfortunate man that I am in danger of losing my beloved son. My lord, how can I assume that this youngster will be able to stand in front of such powerful Rakshasas and fight with them? I have been told that the Devas and the Gandharvas and all the denizens of the heavens are not able to stand up to Ravan. How can this child of mine, my Ram who is not yet 16, how can he fight with the henchmen of Ravan? I have heard it said that the valor of those who fight with him is absorbed into him, and his opponents lose all their prowess. Ram is the scion of my race. I dare not give him to you. I will not give him to you. Subahu and Marich are not the proper adversaries he should encounter in his first taste of fighting. I will fight, my lord. But please do not ask me to give my child." Vishvamitra's patience was at an end. Like a sacrificial fire which burns brighter when ghee is poured into it, the words of the king made him more and more angry, and finally his anger knew no bounds. He looked at the king with his eyes glowing and said, "You made elaborate promises, and now you are trying to go back on your word. This does not bring credit to the illustrious Raghuvamsha of which you are a descendant. If you think you are doing the right thing, I will go back to where I came from. Having broken your promise to your guest, you can live happily with your kinsmen surrounding you." When he spoke thus, the earth trembled in fear, since his anger was known to all. Still the king sat silent. Blinded as he was by his love for his son, he did not realize what he was doing. Vashisht, his mentor, now spoke to him. He said, "Dasharath, you are born of the line of the Ikshvakus. You are expected to be a personification of them himself. You are a righteous man and are well versed in the rules of conduct. You should not behave thus and stay away from the path of Dharma. The world calls you Dharmatma, and you should not besmirch the name of your ancestors and yours too by this action of yours. Once you say that you will do a thing, and then hesitate to do so, it is an act of unworthy of good men, and it will rob you of all the punya you have accumulated so far. Send Ram with the rishi and save your name, and that of your family. This illustrious son of Kaushik will guard Ram like the wheel of fire does the pot." Filled with Amrit. No Rakshas can approach this son of yours, however mighty he may be. I am sure of that. Vishvamitra is the very image of Dharma, and he is a great man. He is a man of great intellect, and his tapas is his wealth. He is proficient in all the Shastras and the sacred lore. No one in all the 3 worlds can gauge the greatness of Vishvamitra. He knows the past, the present and the future. Please send your son with him without any qualms. Do you think it is hard for this great man to kill those two Rakshasas who are wisps of straw in his presence? He can do it. But he wants your son to achieve greatness, and that is the reason why he is honoring you by asking you for Ram. Please realize the honor which has been granted to you, and wake up from this delusion called Putrasneha. When Vashisht spoke thus, Dasharath was convinced and woke up from his mental stupor. He fell at Vishvamitra's feet and craved his pardon. He then said, "In my blind love for my child I spoke hastily. Please forgive me and accept my son. I am sending him with you, and I am happy to do so. Ram is never alone and Lakshman will always be with him. Please take both of them." The words of Vashisht had convinced the king that the prince was taken by Vishvamitra for the good of the youngster, and his words of apology to the rishi were sincere. He sent for Ram and Lakshman. Kaushalya had heard about the decision of the king to send the children with the rishi, and even as the word reached her that the king wanted them, she had prepared them for the journey. Taking leave of their mothers, the handsome young men came and stood before their father. They saluted all the rishis in the great hall, and then they prostrated before their father. They were so handsome that Vishvamitra could not take his eyes off their faces. Ram was dark like a blue lotus and Lakshman was fair. Both had long liquid eyes and their smiles were bewitching. They stood with folded palms in front of their father. Dasharath said, "My dear Ram, Lakshman, the great sage Vishvamitra has come to me with the sole purpose of taking you with him. Go with him and obey his commands in every way as you would mine." The children spoke not a word but went and stood by the side of the rishi after saluting their father and the others in the hall. The wind blew softly and gently and all the omens were good when they left the palace. All those in the hall went up to the doorway to bid adieu to them, and they were amazed to see the rain of flowers from the heavens and the distant music of heavenly drums. Vashisht looked at the king as if to say, "I told you that it is for the good of your sons that the great Vishvamitra came to you asking you to lend them to him." 9. Vishvamitra and the young princes. Vishvamitra walked in front, and he was followed by Ram with a bow in his hand, with a sword at his waist and quivers fastened to his shoulders. Attired similarly, Lakshman walked just behind Ram, and the citizens saw with their eyes wide with wonder at the beautiful spectacle, the rishi like a sacrificial fire, and the two young men like smokeless flames leaping out of it. They looked like five-headed serpents, accoutred as they were for fighting. Several thought of the Ashvini twins following Brahma, when they saw the two princes walking in behind the sage. Their fingers were protected by guards made of skin, and their scabbards, which had been set with precious stones, gleamed in the sunlight. Soon they reached the banks of the river Sarayu, the southern side of it. There, in a very sweet voice, Vishvamitra called out, "Ram." There was a wealth of affection behind it. He said, "Child, fill your palms with water. I will teach you the mantras, Bala and Adibala. Once you know them, neither hunger nor fatigue nor thirst will trouble you while walking with me, and there will be no trace of tiredness bothering you when you walk this long distance to the ashram. You will not be at a disadvantage if the Rakshasas should accost you when you are tired. Ram, I know there is no on the face of this earth to equal you in prowess, bravery, in all the many qualities that make up the ideal Kshatriya. Why, even in the three worlds I am yet to see the like of you. There is no one to equal you in handsomeness, in skill, in wisdom, in the art of conversing with people. Fortunate indeed is Dasharath to have you as his son, and I am fortunate too that you will be with me constantly for a while. As for these mantras, Bala and Adibala, they will make you respected by everyone in all the three worlds. They are the daughters of Brahma. I know that only you are worthy of learning them. Listen to me carefully and learn the mantras." Ram touched water and meditated on the Lord with great humility. He then learnt the mantras from the rishi. Ram looked more powerful than ever after his initiation into the mantras. The young men then paid their respects to the great man, as was the custom, and they proceeded to make the preparations to spend the night on the banks of Sarayu. They spread dried grass and leaves on the ground, and after seeing to the comforts of Vishvamitra, the royal sons spent the night comfortably on the beds to which they were not accustomed. When the night waned into daylight, Vishvamitra approached Ram, who was still asleep, and paused for a while to drink with his eyes the beauty of Ram. He then said, "Ram, Kaushalya's beloved child, the first Sandhya is approaching. Rouse thyself from sleep and perform the morning ablutions." The princes got up at once, bathed in the waters of the river, and offered arghya to the sun standing in the waters. They then approached the rishi and prostrated before him. They began to walk again in pursuit of the journey. They reached the spot where the Saraya joined the divine river Ganga. They looked at the glorious sight with wonderment in their eyes. They saw their several ashrams and the rishis were bent on tapas. The princes approached Vishvamitra and asked him, "Whose ashram is this holy place? Who dwells here? Please tell us." A gentle smile lit up the face of Vishvamitra when he saw the eagerness of the young men. And he said, "I will tell you how this ashram came into existence. Eons of time have passed since then. But then, there was a time when Kam, the god of love, had a form and features. Once Lord Mahadev was performing tapas here. He had lost his wife Sati, and with his mind filled with anger and sorrow he came here, all alone, and was absorbed in meditation. Parvati, the daughter of Himavan, was serving him. The Devas were desirous that he should wed her since Parvati was Sati born again as the daughter of Himavan. The gods had been told that the son born of them would be the commander of the army of the Devas. Indra asked Kam to go to the neighborhood of the spot where Mahadev was, and he asked to aim his arrows at the Lord. When Parvati was standing before Mahadev, he had just opened his eyes, and Kam thought it was an opportune moment to shoot his arrows made of flowers. The Lord was hit, and he turned to see who had the audacity to do this, and his eyes lighted on Kam. Mahadev was furious and he opened his third eye, the eye of Agni, and burnt Kam. Kam was, from then, without a form and is now famed as Ananga, the formless one. The spot where his ashes were wafted to is known as the country Anga. As for this ashram, you must have guessed that this is the spot where Kam was burnt to ashes, and these rishis are all disciples of Mahadev. It is rightly named Kamshram. Let me take you to the rishis there. They will be pleased to see you both, and they will bless you. In the place where the two holy rivers become one, let us spend the night, and we will cross the Ganga tomorrow. After purifying ourselves we will enter the ashram. The rishis who knew all that had happened in the past, and who could look into the future beyond the veil of time, knew who had come to their ashrams, and were immensely pleased. They welcomed Vishvamitra with great affection, and they were thrilled to see the young men, who were so humble and so gentle in their speech and in their conduct. The guests spent a happy time in the Kamshram with the rishis, and Vishvamitra entertained them with stories about the many spots which they were to visit. 10. TAARKA VANA. Day dawning, the warriors led by Vishvamitra reached the banks of the river Ganga. The rishis who were there secured for them a boat and told Vishvamitra, "Please use this boat to cross the river with the princes. Do not tarry." "So be it," said Vishvamitra, and the three travelers sat in the boat and crossed the river Ganga, which was flowing towards the sea. When they were crossing, in the midst of the river they heard a great noise. Ram and Lakshman were impressed by the thunderous noise which was continuous, and Ram said, "Lord, where is this roar from? It is wondrous and, at the same time, fearful." "I will tell you," said the sage. "Brahma once created out of his mind a lake which is rightly named Mansarovar. This river Sarayu which flows all along the edge of your city, Ayodhya, was born out of this Saras. At this spot actually, she is blending with the golden waters of the Ganga. Salute the two rivers." They did as they were bid, and soon they reached the southern banks of the river. They resumed their walk. After a while they reached a dark forest. It was dense and damp. No light from the sun could filter into the forest, so thickly were the tree branches intertwined. But what surprised Ram was the beauty of the forest and a strange lack of habitation there. This spot, which seemed ideally suited for any number of ashrams, was empty, and there was an eerie and frightening silence pervading the entire place. Only animals seemed to make their presence felt. Ram said, "My lord, what strange noises! Beetles are making shrill music, and the wild animals are roaring and making characteristic noises. Even the birds seem to cry harshly, and there is no music emanating from their throats. The trees are all dense, and they have darkened the place. I am not able to see anything. I cannot see the sun at all. Tell us what forest this is, and why it is deserted by human beings." Vishvamitra was pleased with the natural curiosity of the youngsters, and he said, "I will tell you. This forest was not really a forest before. Two countries by name Malada and Karusha were existing here. They were fertile and they were well populated. Indra, when he slew Viratra, was guilty of Brahmahatya. He was purified by the heavenly host of rishis with waters from all the sacred rivers. And he was rid of the sin. This was the ground on which the waters flowed from the body of Indra, and the Lord of the heavens, pleased with the earth for having received the polluted water, said, 'I bless this ground.' The countries will be called Malada and Karusha, and they will be extremely fertile." The fame of these two was a byword in the three worlds, since they had been blessed by Indra. Now, several years later, a terrible Rakshasi, by name TAARKA, took possession of this place. She is ugly, horrible to look at, cruel by nature. She can assume any form she likes, and she has the strength of 1,000 elephants. She is the wife of a good Yaksh by name Sunanda, and her son is Marich, who will bring you fame in later years. This Rakshasi has occupied the entrance to the two countries, and no human being dares to enter here, since she is extremely fond of human flesh. A yojana and a half from where we are standing now is her dwelling place. I am asking you to kill her. Kill this TAARKA and make this land habitable once more. You and only you will be the man who has the courage enough to enter the land occupied by the dreadful woman, and as for the number of human beings she has consumed, there is no count. This TAARKA does not boast of a single inhabitant. Still she will not abandon this place and go elsewhere." Ram was listening to the words of Vishvamitra very carefully. He then asked in a soft and gentle voice, "My lord, you tell me that she is the wife of a Yaksh. I have been told that Yakshas are not so powerful as the other heavenly beings, like the Devas, for instance. How can a mere woman be so strong? You say that she has the strength of 1,000 elephants. How can that be possible?" "It is a pertinent question," said Vishvamitra. "It is because of a boon which she was granted. Once there was a powerful Yaksh by name Saketu. He had no sons, and so he performed a very intense tapas. Pleased with him, Brahma granted him a daughter by name TAARKA. She was granted the strength of 1,000 elephants. But the Yaksh did not get what he had prayed for, a son. But it was the will of the gods, and so, satisfied with the gift which had been granted him, the Yaksh brought up his daughter as he would a son. She grew up to be a beautiful maiden, and she was of marriageable age. He gave her to Sunanda, the son of Jarjara. In course of time she gave birth to a son by name Marich. Sunanda died, and after his death, TAARKA's nature underwent a change. She went with her son to the ashram of Agastya, and began to harass that great man with her advances. She desired him, and with this desire evident by her progress, TAARKA went towards Agastya. Looking at her and her behavior, which was entirely against all modesty expected of a woman, Agastya, who was radiant as Lord Agni himself, became very angry, and he cursed her to become a Rakshasi. "You will lose these attractive, feminine looks, and you will be ugly and formidable. You will eat human flesh and be despised by all," said the rishi. Furious with Agastya for this curse, TAARKA has occupied this country, and she has been killing anyone and everyone who has been foolish enough to enter this forest without knowing about her. Ram, for the sake of protecting the human beings in the neighborhood, the hermits, the cows and other gentle animals, you are to kill this Rakshasi. No one but you will be able to kill her. I know that you are not very keen. You are not happy about it, since she is a woman. But then the duty of a Kshatriya, as I know only too well, is to protect the oppressed and the good. It has been the glory of the house in which you are born that no one has shirked in his duty, which is doing good to others. Several people have killed women for the common good. Indra himself killed Mandara, the daughter of Virochana, who had been wanting to destroy this entire world. Bhrigu's wife, the mother of Sakra, once desired that there should be no Indra. And Lord Narayan himself killed her. Several other women who have been sinful have been killed in the past. Do not hesitate to kill TAARKA. The prince stood humbly in front of the rishi and said, "My father, when he sent us with you, said, 'Go with him and obey in all things as you would my commands.' He spoke to me in the presence of the elders of his court, and I will never disobey my father. I will certainly do as you ask me to. I will kill TAARKA since you have asked me to. It is a command and it should be obeyed. For the sake of protecting the hermits and the cows and for the good of the country, I am prepared to do your bidding." 11. The killing of TAARKA. Even as he was saying so, there arose the glorious noise of the bowstring which he had been drawing. Ram held the bow in his left hand, and his head was flung back. The entire forest reverberated with the sound. Hearing it, TAARKA was surprised. It was a long time since anyone had dared to enter her forest. She thought for a moment and, incensed beyond measure, rushed in the direction from which the noise came. From atop the hillock there appeared the frightening female, who was ugliness personified. Looking at her looming up like another hillock, whose face was old and fearful to look at, Ram turned to Lakshman and said, "Lakshman, look at this dreadful woman. The very sight of her will make weak hearts stand still with fear. It will not be easy to subdue her. I am going to cut off her nose and ears at the tips and see the fun." As he was talking to Lakshman, TAARKA rushed towards them with both her arms uplifted. Vishvamitra made her halt in her tracks by scolding her, and he said, "May the two sons of the Raghuvams succeed in their attempt." TAARKA was spraying stones and mud on the young men, and the sky was filled with the dust. It was dark for a long while, and they could see nothing. She then sent a real rain of stones which made the gentle prince extremely angry. With his arrows Ram destroyed the stones and cut off her arms. Lakshman, in the meantime, heard her roar with anger and pain, and he cut off the tips of her nose and ears. TAARKA suddenly vanished from their sight, and from out of nowhere there rained on them a number of stones hurled by her. Both the brothers pulled the strings of their bows, and the noise was so frightening that she forgot all about her Maya warfare and fell on the ground senseless. Vishvamitra said, "Ram, there is no need for you to have any compunction about slaying this dreadful sinner. Evening is fast approaching, and it is only too well known that the strength of Rakshasas increase with the setting of the Sunday." Ram felt that the time had come when he should kill her. Not heeding the stones which were being hurled at him, Ram took an arrow, pulled it as near his ear as possible and released it. The arrow hit TAARKA's chest, entered it, and she fell dead on the hill. The heavenly host rejoiced when Ram accomplished this task which had seemed impossible. Indra with his attendants came to Vishvamitra and said, "All our gratitude for bringing the son of the great Dasharath to rid the world of this sinful woman. You know there are many such tasks which have to be accomplished by him. May your blessings be showered on him fully." The denizens from heaven went back. Evening drew near and Vishvamitra raised Ram, who had prostrated before him, and said, "Ram, we will spend the night here, and in the morning we will be on the last lap of our journey. We will soon reach my ashram." As soon as the Rakshasi TAARKA was killed, the forest changed its complexion completely. It was a startling sight. When they woke up in the morning, Vishvamitra and the young princes saw the forest freed from the taint of TAARKA. Flowers were blooming everywhere, champaka, ashik, punnaga, and malika. Mango trees and panasa trees and many palm trees could be seen bearing fruits. Ponds could now be seen everywhere with clear water, and it seemed to be as beautiful as Chatra, the garden of Kuber. Vishvamitra's eyes rested lovingly on Ram. They strayed away from there to the beautiful surroundings and came back to Ram. He said, I am extremely pleased with you. May you be famed the world over for your prowess. Accept my blessings. I am so pleased with you that I am going to make a rare gift to you. Ram and Lakshman were intrigued by the words of Vishvamitra. They said, You have blessed us and you have told us that you are pleased with us. Is there any other gift greater than this, my lord? Vishvamitra smiled and said, You may know about it or you may not. But I am telling you now that I am in possession of all the divine astras you can think of. I will give them to you. With the help of these astras you will be able to vanquish all the enemies you will come across later. I will now grant all of them to you. Learn the incantations carefully from me, and you will be able to master them very soon. Ram sat facing the east after purifying himself, and the rishi taught him the astras, which he had obtained from Mahadev after performing intense tapas. Those were the days when he thought he needed them. He had passed those days and he needed them no more. Smiling to himself at his earlier struggles, the sage Vishvamitra taught them all to Ram one by one, the method by which he should invoke the astra, the manner in which it should be dispatched and the manner of withdrawing it. And all the presiding deities came and stood before Ram. Folding their palms they said, Noble Ram, we are now your slaves and will do your bidding. Ram told them, Reside in my mind all the time and come to me when I want you. Vishvamitra asked Ram to teach the astras to Lakshman now, and he did so. The three of them hastened towards the ashram of Vishvamitra with a chastened look. The young men were still under the euphoria of the sight of the presiding deities of the astras, and the rishi, realizing this, gave them time to get used to the possession of the astras. 12. SIDDHASHRAM. As they were walking along, Ram again asked Vishvamitra, There is a beautiful mountain there, and nestling at its foot is a grove which is pleasing to the eye. Even at this distance I can see deer dark as rain clouds. Birds with sweet voices are singing in the grove. This green grove of trees capture my mind. Tell us what the place is. We just came out of a forest which was so fearful and uninhabited, and this is all the more exciting since it seems to be a happy place. How far away from here is the ashram of your gracious self? I have become very impatient since I am eager to see those sinners who are causing so much discomfort to you. When will I see those wicked Rakshasas who kill hermits without compunction? When will I be able to kill them? Vishvamitra was only too eager to answer the questions of Ram. He said, This grove has a long history behind it. I will relate it to you. Ages back, the great Lord Narayan, the all-pervading, who is the cause of the creation, the preservation and the destruction of this entire universe, performed tapas here. And again, this is the place where Vaman had his dwelling place, and hence it is called SIDDHASHRAM. Bali, the son of Virochana, was the emperor. He had defeated all the rival DEVAS as also the Maruts and Indra too. He was famed all the world over for his prowess and for his generous nature. He once performed a yugna. The yugna was to confirm his position as the lord of the three worlds. It was in this ashram that the devas led by Agni approached Narayan and said, Lord, Bali is well known for his generosity. He has never said no to anyone who has asked him for anything. You must make use of this characteristic in him, and help us to regain the world which we have lost to him. In the meantime, Kashyap, the great Prajapati who was like the god of fire, so radiant was he because of his tapas, desired a son. His wife Addi was like his other self in glory, and this great man once performed tapas with the image of Narayan deeply engraved in his mind. To him came the Lord in person, and asked him what he desired. Kashyap the son of Marichi said, Please do not think it audacious on my part, when I ask you to be born as my son. You must be born as the son of Addi, and you must wipe her tears which are flowing because of the unhappiness of her children, the Devas. Our purpose should thus be served, and this ashram, where you will be born, will be famed the world over as the SIDDHASHRAM, since we would have attained our desires. So be it, said Narayan with a smile. Addi became the mother of the Lord in human form. He was so small and so much like a miniature of a man that he was called Vaman, along with his other name Upendra. When the yagna of Bali was in progress, Vaman went to the Yugnasala. Bali stood up and greeted this young Brahmin, who was like a heap of gold. He said, "What will you have, my young Brahmin? You look so beautiful and so radiant. I have a feeling you do not belong to this earth but to the heavens. No human being can look so glorious. Ask anything of me, and I will give it to you. I am eager to please you." Vaman was gratified by the generous nature of the king, and said, "O king, it is but proper for the son of Virochana to talk thus. The world talks of nothing but the great yagna you are performing, and so I came to you hoping that you will give me something. I want very little, but I will ask only if you assure me that I will be granted my wish." The king smiled at the young child, for so he thought, and said, "It is my great fortune that you should come to me asking me to give you something. My tapas has been sanctified only now. My very life seems purposeful only now, and I feel that I have been born for this only task, granting you what you ask for. My kingship and all the many good acts which I may have performed seems to bear fruit at this moment when you have come to me. My treasury, my granary, my army, my entire kingdom, all these are at your disposal. Ask of me anything you please and it is yours." A beautiful smile lit up the face of the young Brahmin, and he said, "Of what use is all this to me, O king? I am but a poor dweller in an ashram and my needs are few. All I want is a bit of land, a piece from your kingdom which can be covered by 3 paces of mine." The king was amused at the request of Vaman. He smiled tolerantly at Vaman and said, "I will grant you 3 places of land as you wish." Sakracharya, the Bhargav, was the preceptor of Bali, and he stopped the king from taking water in his hand preparatory to the gift and said, "Bali, this is no ordinary Brahmin. He is that truth which cannot be known even by Brahma, or the Devas, or by yogis who spend years and years in tapas. He is Narayan. You should not grant him his wish. If you do, you will be destroyed. Narayan, as is well known, is ever partial to the Devas, and their good will be the consequences of your gift." Bali would not listen to him. "If the Lord of Lords has assumed this form to bless me with the request, my yagna has been fulfilled to a glorious degree. What greater good fortune can befall one like me," said the king, and, with his wife pouring the water into his hands, he gave away 3 paces of land to the youngster who was standing with his little right hand held out to receive the gift. When the water touched his hand, and when the gift had been granted, Vaman grew. Narayan assumed his Visvaripa. With one blessed foot he covered the entire earth, and with the other the heavens. Bali worshipped him with great gladness in his heart, and he spoke to himself, "Narayan himself came to me with a request, and I was able to grant it. Can anyone be more fortunate than me?" He stood with folded palms, with tears streaming from his eyes. Narayan thus regained for Indra his kingdom, and restored to him his throne. That grove which seems to thrill you so much was where Vaman was born. Since it is a SIDDHASHRAM where everyone will get what he wants, I have chosen it as my ashram for performing this yagna for the good of mankind. The dreadful Rakshasas come only to this ashram, and it is here, my child, that they must be killed. Children, we are nearing the SIDDHASHRAM. This spot is mine, which means that it is yours too." Even as they were talking and walking, they reached the ashram. With the 2 young princes on either side of him, Vishvamitra entered the ashram, and he looked like the moon with the star Punarvaso on a cloudless clear sky. The rishis worshipped him and welcomed the princes. After they had rested for a while, since this last lap of the journey was long, the brothers went to the presence of Vishvamitra and stood before him. They said, "My lord, you can resume your diksha. Your yagna will proceed uninterrupted. We can assure you of that. As you have said so aptly, the ashram cannot lost its name, and we cannot let it go waste." Vishvamitra assumed diksha that night, and the princes slept throughout the night without any worry. When the night had passed, they rose up early, and purifying themselves they went to the presence of Vishvamitra, who was seated on holy darba grass after performing Agnihotra, the worship of the fire. 13. The Yagna of Vishvamitra. The young princes went to the presence of the rishi and asked him, "We would like to be told when the Rakshasas will make their appearance. We want to be prepared for their coming." Looking at them eager to fight with the Rakshasas and to kill them, the rishis in the ashram of Vishvamitra were pleased beyond measure. They spoke gently and softly, "From today, the yagna will last for 6 days. Since he has taken up the Diksha, the great saint Vishvamitra is silent. He has to observe the vow of silence. For 6 days and 6 nights you will both have to be alert and guard the Yugnasala." "We will do so," said Ram. The brothers took up their bows, strung them, and stood grasping them firmly with their left hands, and with the arrows poised in their right hands they stood, alert, ready and eager. Day and night they went round the Yugnasala, guarding it like the eyelids guard the eyes from danger. 5 days and 5 nights passed without any mishap. Ram said, "Lakshman, be very careful. Today is the last day, and we have to be prepared for the coming of the 2 evil doers." The fire in the Yugnakunda was burning with a greater brilliance as Ram spoke. It was a great and glorious sight. The fire, presided over by the noble Vishvamitra and surrounded by all the rishis. The music of the recital of the Vedas, sonorous, slow and dignified, filled the 4 quarters with a feeling of awe and, at the same time, peace. It purified the very air which carried it everywhere. There was a sudden noise like the clap of thunder at the coming of monsoon. Like a rain cloud darkens the sky during the rainy season, the sky was suddenly dark. Ram and Lakshman knew that the Rakshasas had appeared. They had their myrmidons with them, and there rained a ghastly rain made up of blood and flesh. The Rakshasas did not expect any opposition, and they had not assumed the Maya tactics, and Ram could see them clearly. Angered beyond measure at the manner in which they were trying to pollute the holy Yugnasala, Ram told Lakshman, "Look, Lakshman. Look at these flesh-eating Rakshasas, who are trying to molest these good men. Watch me scatter them and their associates like the rain clouds will be by a fast wind." Angry with the act of the intruders, Ram took up the astra called Manavastra, and aimed at the chest of Marich. Taken unawares, unused to opposition from anyone at any time, Marich felt as though lightning had struck him. Before he could even think, the astra carried him to a distance of 100 yojanas and threw him into the sea. But it did not kill him. Ram said, "Look at this Manavastra and its power, Lakshman. It has carried this sinner to a distance of 100 yojanas and has thrown him into the sea. But it has not killed him. This is a compassionate astra. It punishes but does not kill." The noble Vishvamitra had told us much, and it is true. But I am not giving so much of latitude to the others. I will kill all of them. Ram took up the Agni Astra, the astra presided over by fire, and aimed it at the chest of Subbahu, the other miscreant. Subbahu fell to the ground dead. With the help of Vayavastra, the astra presided over by the god of wind, Ram killed the rest of the Rakshas host. The yagna was protected only too well by Ram and Lakshman, and there was great joy in the hearts of all the rishis in the SIDDHASHRAM. That night was the last night of the yagna. The next morning, after the conclusion of the yagna with the proper rituals, Vishvamitra called the young men to his side and said, "Ram, you are indeed a great warrior, and your fame will now spread in all the 4 quarters. With your help I have been able to complete the yagna which I had begun some time back. SIDDHASHRAM is SIDDHASHRAM today." Ram and Lakshman were happy that they had accomplished the task which they had undertaken, and they spent the night in a happy frame of mind. When the night had passed, and when the sun's rim brightened the eastern sky, they rose up from their sleep. They went to their guru Vishvamitra, who was surrounded by a crowd of rishis. Everyone was looking radiant since the yagna, which at a time seemed an almost impossible task to have been taken up, had been completed with the help of the young princes from Ayodhya. As soon as they saw the young men, they all blessed them in unison with the words, "Jaya Vijaya Bhava. May you be ever victorious." Vishvamitra sat with a gentle smile on his lips. Ram spoke to him in a respectful and soft voice. He said, "We are here waiting for further commands from you. Please, my lord, tell us what we should do now. VISHVAMITRA said, in Mithila, King Janak is performing a yajna. He is a very righteous king, a Rajarshi. We are all going to Mithila, and I would like you to come with us. There is something in Mithila which will interest princes like you. The famed bow of Mahadev is there with Janak, and I am sure you will like to have a look at it. That bow is very powerful, and it is said to glow like the sun. It was given to the ancestors of Janak during the performance of a yajna. It is also well known that no deva, nor an asura, nor Gandharv or a man has been able to lift and string the divine bow. Many were the kings and princes who tried to, but they failed miserably. You must see this bow, RAAM. It is a wonderful bow. It is placed in the palace of the king, and is worshipped with flowers and incense every day. We will soon begin our journey to Mithila. 14. To Mithila. Vishvamitra addressed the demigods who guarded the ashram and the forest. I have completed what I had undertaken. The SIDDHASHRAM has retained her name. After visiting Mithila, I will proceed towards Himavan, the mountain where the sacred Ganga has her source. I wish you well, and this place will always be a blessed spot. Accompanied by the rishis and by Ram and Lakshman, the sage Vishvamitra made a pradakshina to the ashram and began his journey towards the north. Several people followed them, even the birds and the deer which were living in the ashram. With gentle persuasive words Vishvamitra coaxed them back and proceeded with the journey. After covering a considerable distance, when the sun was sloping westwards, they reached the banks of the river Sana and remained there. They sat around Vishvamitra when they found a charming spot to relax. Ram, with his brother, sat very near the rishi. He asked Vishvamitra, "This country is beautiful. I see nothing but green everywhere, and evidently it is a very fertile and fruitful land. Tell me, whom does it belong to?" Vishvamitra was only too eager to answer his question. He began, Lord Brahma had a son by name Kusa. He was a great tapasvan, and he married the daughter of the king of Videha, and 4 sons were born to him. Kushba, Kushnabha, Adhirtarajas and Vasu. All of them were valiant like their father and equally righteous. The king asked his sons to follow the dharma of kshatriyas and to rule the world. They founded 4 cities and each ruled one. Kushba's city went by the name Kaushambi. Kushnabha's city was Mahodhaya. Adhirtarajas named his city Dharmranya, and Vasu was the ruler of the city by name Jirivraja. This country which you admire so much is called Vasumti, and it belongs to Vasu. There are 5 mountains here, and the river which has its source in the Magadha kingdom, flows in between the mountains like a garland of flowers flung on the earth. Kushnabha had 100 daughters who were given to Brahmadatta, a noble rishi. The king was desirous of a son, and he asked Brahmadatta to perform a yajna for him. During the performance of the yajna, Kusa, the father of Kushnabha, said, "Do not worry. You will be the father of a son by name Gadi. Because of him your name will be famed throughout the world." After some time, a son was born to Kushnabha, and his name was Gadi. Ram, Gadi was my father. My elder sister was Satyavati, and she was given in marriage to a saintly man by name Richaka. She was so pure and so good that she reached the heavens with the human body. She became a sacred river by name Kaushiki. This pure woman, my sister, was born into this world only to do good to others. This is the reason why I spend all my time on the banks of Kaushiki in the Himavan mountains. When I am there, unbelievable peace enfolds me, and I am extremely happy. Because I had a duty to perform, I left the banks of that pure river and came down south. I came to SIDDHASHRAM, and with your assistance, I was able to achieve what I had set out to do. Now you know whose country this is. Look. Half the night has passed by. I have been talking unaware of the passing of time. The trees have gone to sleep, perhaps. Even a leaf does not move, so still is the night. Animals and birds have covered themselves with this dark night, and have gone to sleep. The first half of the night is gradually disappearing, and the sky, studded with the myriad stars, seems to have 1,000 eyes with which to look at us. The moon is just now brightening the east, and his soft rays will soon embrace the world and banish the enveloping darkness. Only the night birds, the Pishakas, Rakshasas and Buddhas are making use of the darkness. You must sleep now, children. We must continue the journey tomorrow. We will set about it early in the morning. 15. Ganga. The music of the birds and the rustling of the waters of the river Sana were waking them up, and soon they were awake. Even before they could get up, Vishvamitra was by their side, and he said, "Children, the dark night has passed and the dawn is fast approaching. Let us hurry and make preparations for the journey." Ram and his brother soon went to Vishvamitra, ready to leave with them. He asked Vishvamitra, "My lord, this river does not seem to be fed enough with water. I can see sandy islands here, and they're breaking the even flow of the river. Where are we planning to cross the river?" "We will follow the path of the rishis who have gone this way before," said Vishvamitra, and the troop walked fast towards the north. After a long trudge, when the sun hard reached the zenith, they saw in front of them the broad expanse of the sacred river Ganga. They were thrilled at the sight of the river with swans and lotuses floating on its surface. They stood for a while looking at the beauty of the waters, and they made up their minds to spend some time on her banks. As usual in the evening they sat around Vishvamitra. Ram asked the rishi, "I want to hear the story of this sacred river Ganga. She is called Tripathaga, the river with the three paths. How did she purify the three worlds and finally reach the sea, the lord of all rivers? I am very eager to listen to the thrilling story." "There is a mountain by name Himavan," began Vishvamitra. "Himavan is the lord of all mountains, and he had two daughters who were unrivaled in beauty. Their mother was Meena, also known as Manoram. Ganga was the elder of the two daughters, and the younger is known by the name Parvati and also by the name Uma. The Devas wanted Ganga for themselves. They went to Himavan and asked him to make a gift of his daughter to them. Himavan agreed, and Ganga, who converted herself into a river, flowed in the heavens, and her waters purified whatever it touched. She was famed as Mandakini in the heavens, and is also known as Akasha Ganga. The other daughter Uma performed severe tapas, and her devotion was rewarded. Her father gave her to Lord Mahadev. These two daughters of Himavan are worthy of the worship of the three worlds. Ram, one of your ancestors, was a king by name Sagar. He was, for a long time, childless. He had two wives. One was Kazanai, the daughter of the king of Vidarbha. The second wife was Sumti, the daughter of Kashyap. She was famed for her beauty. With a desire for a child, the king went to the slopes of the Himavan with his wives. There he performed tapas. After 100 years had passed, the rishi Bhrgu came to him and said, "You will certainly become a father, and because of them your name will be ever remembered by the world of men. One of your wives will be the mother of a son, only one son, who will continue the line of the Ikshvakus. The other will be the mother of 60,000 sons, all valiant, powerful and brave." The princesses were very happy, and they stood before him humbly and said, "Which of us will be the mother of the 60,000 sons? And which of us will bear the son who will continue the line? We are eager to know." Bhrgu said, "The choice is yours. One of you will have to choose the single progeny, while the other will have the 60,000 sons." Kazanai, the elder queen, chose to be the mother of the only son, while Sumti, the younger, was happy in the anticipation of her many sons who were to be born to her. King Sagar took leave of the rishi and went back to his kingdom. In course of time a son was born to Kazanai. He was named as Asamanja. To his dismay the king realized that this son was wicked in the real sense of the word. He enjoyed doing evil acts. When he was a young boy he would catch hold of young children and throw them into the river Sarayu. He would stand watching them struggling in the water before they were drowned. He would clap his hands in glee. Sagar thought that he would improve as he grew older. But no. He became more and more unpopular. The townfolk finally came to the king and told him about the atrocities performed by the prince. Righteous man that he was, Sagar did not hesitate even for a moment. He meted out punishment for such a miscreant, banishment from the kingdom. The one consolation the king had was that ASHVAMEDH's son, by name ASHVAMEDH, did not inherit his father's nature but was a good, sweet, gentle child, ever devoted to his grandfather. The other wife of the king, Sumanti, became the mother of the 60,000 sons as had been prophesied, lusty young men who were very powerful, handsome and extremely arrogant. They were the pride of the mother. Once Sagar wanted to perform the ASHVAMEDH. The location of the YUGYA was beautiful. The north is proud of the powerful Himavan, and facing it, which is a large range. These two mountains stand as though challenging each other in greatness. The land between these two was chosen as the site for the YUGYA. The youngster ASHVAMEDH was asked to accompany the sacrificial horse in its triumphant march through all the kingdoms. Indra, who is ever jealous of the kings of the earth who perform the ASHVAMEDH, was very prompt in stealing the horse, and he disappeared with it. The pundits who were performing the yajna could not proceed with the rituals until the horse was found, and they told the king about the urgency of the matter. They said, unless the horse is found and the yajna is completed, grave disaster will follow. Sagar called his powerful sons and said, "You have heard the words of the rishis. Please make haste and go in search of the horse. This sacrifice can be performed without any fault by only very few people, and, once begun, it has to be concluded. Please go at once and search in all the four quarters and in the nether worlds also." The lusty Kshatriya princes, the Sagaputras, were very happy to do so as they were told. They set out in quest of the horse. With their powerful arms they dug up the earth. Each prince allotted to himself 1 yojana of ground and dug into it. The entire surface of the earth had been dug up, and they could not find the horse. The earth groaned under the fierce onslaught of the princes. Serpents, animals and even the Rakshasas suffered, and the air was filled with their cries of pain which were piteous to hear. When they did not find the horse on the surface of the earth, Sagar's sons entered the nether regions. They saw the Digayas, the elephants bearing the earth on their mighty heads, Virupaksh, Mahapadma, Samanta and Bhadra. But they were not able to see the horse. Finally they went deep into the nether lands, and they came to the vicinity of a cave. When they were wondering as to who was inside, they heard the neighing of a horse. The princess were surprised at this. Promptly they went inside the cave. It was an ashram which was more like a cave than usual hermitage. When they went inside, the valiant brothers saw Kapila Vasudev, the great rishi, who was lost in meditation. Beyond him, beyond where he was sitting, they saw, tied to a tree, their father's sacrificial horse. They were happy that their search was at an end. The sons of Sagar shouted, "This is the thief. He has stolen our horse, and having reached this underground retreat, he has assumed the garb of a sannyasi and pretends to be in deep meditation. Let us punish him." With their minds completely bemused because of their anger against the rishi, the sons of Sagar rushed at Kapila with their hands holding different weapons. They shouted at the great men, calling him thief, and Kapila, opening his eyes because of the noise they made, saw what was happening. He looked at them with angry eyes, and that was enough to reduce all of them to ashes. The 60,000 sons of Sagar were now just a heap of ashes. The rishi went back into trance as though nothing had happened. Sagar, in the meantime, waited in vain for the return of his sons with the horse. Finally, he asked his grandson ASHVAMEDH to go and find out what has happened. The young prince went along the path which his uncles had taken, and soon reached the cave where Kapila was. ASHVAMEDH entered the cave, and there he saw the horse. ASHVAMEDH stood humbly and waited for the great man to come out of his samadhi. When Kapila opened his eyes, he saw a young man standing before him with folded palms. ASHVAMEDH prostrated before the rishi, and taking the dust of his feet he spoke to him, and told him about his errand. Kapila said, "Here is your horse, child. Indra, as usual, has stolen it and brought it here. As for your uncles, there they are," he said, and pointed the heap of ashes. "They behaved in an unforgivable manner, and with my looks I burnt them to ashes." ASHVAMEDH looked around for water so that he could offer the funeral oblations, the tarpan, to his elders. But he could find no water there. But he found Garud, the brother of Sumti, coming towards him. And he said, "Child, do not be too unhappy. This is but the law of nature. Your uncles, my nephews, were too arrogant to be popular. As for the Anjali you want to offer them, ordinary water will not wipe out their sin. Ganga, the elder daughter of Himavan, is the only one who will be able to purify them. Ask her to come down to the earth. The holy waters of Ganga must wet these ashes. Then, and only then, will they attain salvation." Amshuman was speechless with sorrow, and with the stupendous task which he had been asked to undertake. Garud then said, "That will be later. Now hurry with the horse to the presence of your grandfather, and let him complete the ASHVAMEDH." Amshuman returned to the kingdom with the horse, and the sacrifice was concluded. But the king was greatly unhappy at the turn of events. He did not know how to make the divine river Ganga flow on the earth. After some time he left the kingdom in the hands of his grandson Amshuman, and King Sugar, accompanied by his wives, went to the forest to perform tapas, and then to reach the heavens. Amshuman ruled the kingdom well, and he had no time to try and woo Ganga to come down to the earth. He had a son by name Dilip. Amshuman left the kingdom in his hands, and went to the slopes of the Himavan to perform penance in order to get Ganga. But it was in vain. He died without accomplishing his object. Dilip also suffered the same way. He could not, during his reign, achieve the desire in the hearts of all of them, the coming of Ganga to the earth, and the salvation of the sons of Sagar. 16. Bhagirath's penance. Dilip had a son by name Bhagirath. Dilip ruled the kingdom until illness overtook him, and crowning Bhagirath as the king, Dilip died. The one purpose in the life of Bhagirath was to make his ancestors reach the heavens. He left the kingdom in the hands of efficient ministers, and went to perform tapas. Brahma was pleased with the intense tapas which the king was bent on, and he appeared before Bhagirath and said, "The Devas and I are pleased with your penance. Ask what thou wilt of me. I will certainly grant it." Bhagirath, with his eyes filled with tears of gratefulness, spoke in a voice choked with tears. "My lord, if you want to grant me a boon, grant me this, that my forefathers reach the heavens. I have to perform the Nirvapanjali for them with the waters of the Ganga. And, my lord, the line of the Ikshvakus should not terminate with me. These are the boons I ask of you," said Bhagirath. Brahma said, "Have no fear. Your line will not stop with you. You will be the father of a son. As for Ganga, you know that she is the daughter of Himavan. When she descends from the heavens, no one will be able to bear the force of her descent except Lord Mahadev. You must pray to him." Bhagirath now addressed himself to Mahadev and spent a whole year fasting, with just air for food. Mahadev was pleased with the devotion of the king, and appeared before him and said, "My mind is pleased with you and your desire to win for your forefathers a place in the heavens. I will take Ganga on my head and break the force of her descent." Ganga, the daughter of Himavan, had, at the command of Brahma, agreed to come down to the earth. According to the promise he had given Bhagirath, Lord Mahadev stood on a raised plateau of the mountain by name Himavan. All the heavenly beings had assembled in the skies to see the great and glorious sight. Bhagirath was standing with his eyes lifted to the skies from where Ganga was to descend. They were waiting, and suddenly they heard a mighty roar. Ganga was in the sky, and an immense sheet of water began to rush towards the earth. It seemed as though the sea had reached the heavens, and was rushing back to the earth in a hurry. Ganga had become very proud of the fact that she was indispensable. She told herself, "I will rush down with such fury that I will sweep Mahadev into the Patal, and the earth too." Gauging her mind, Mahadev knew that her pride had to be humbled. He stood with his trident held behind his back with both his hands, with his head slightly raised, and a beatific smile shadowing his lips. So he stood when Ganga came down to the earth. The sacred Ganga fell straight onto the hallowed head of Mahadev. Everyone was watching her descent. Then they saw a strange sight. Ganga's waters were coming down from the sky, but when they reached the matted locks of my Lord Mahadev, they were absorbed by them. Ganga was lost there and no one could see her. Try as she might, she could find no way out of the tangled mass of the Lord's locks. Bhagirath was desperate and he praised the Lord and prayed that he should have compassion on him. Mahadev felt that he had punished her enough, and he allowed Ganga to emerge from his jeta along a single strand of hair. Drop by drop she came and a pool was formed which was named Bindisaras. Ganga was thus called Alkananda. When the pool became a lake and when it was full, the river flowed in 7 streams. 3 of these flowed eastwards and 3 towards the west. The 7th followed Bhagirath as his chariot rushed towards the south, towards the cave where the Sagarputras were waiting for their deliverance. The earth looked like the sky with swans flying around, so white was the foam of the river as she followed the king's chariot. She was so willful. Here she would flow straight as an arrow, and there she would wind like a serpent. She would rush fast at some spots and at others, she would just meander like a woman walking in her pleasure garden. She would flow smoothly on the ground for a while, and suddenly, she would tumble like a child at play. So she went to purify the earth. She had washed the feet of Narayan, and she had passed the region of the moon. She had been born on the head of Mahadev and thus, thrice purified, she had come down to the sinful earth to grant salvation for a fistful of ashes. Such is the greatness of the heavenly borns. Ganga reached Patal and finally Bhagirath's dream came true. He saw the ashes of his ancestor drenched in the waters of the divine Ganga. Brahma came to Bhagirath and said, "Child, you have achieved something which was by no means easy. So long as the waters remain in the ocean, your forefathers who gave the ocean its name Sagar will remain in the heavens. Ganga will be your eldest daughter in the eyes of the gods, and she will be called Bhagirathi." Vishvamitra's narration was complete and he said, "Ram, my child, as usual, I have been talking for so long. I have told you the story of how Ganga came down to the earth. Ganga who is Tripathaga since she was in the heavens, on the earth and in Patal too. Evening is fast approaching. Let us prepare to rest for the night." "What a thrilling tale," exclaimed Ram. Neither he nor his brother could bet over the thrill of it. They spent the whole night thinking of the strange things which had happened long ago, and so passed the night. 17. Towards GAUTAM'S ashram. Early in the morning the party of rishis headed by Vishvamitra, who had the princes by his side, went to Vishal, a beautiful city. They had crossed the Ganga with the help of a boat, and reached the other bank. Ram was still thinking of the glorious narration of the descent of Ganga. On the northern banks of Ganga they saw the city by name Vishal. As was natural to him, Ram wanted to know whose city it was and who was ruling it now. Vishvamitra said, "The history of this city goes as far back in time as the churning of the ocean of milk when Amrit was found. The Devas and the Asuras vied with each other to be the sole possessors of the bowl containing nectar. Narayan, with his guile, managed to let the Devas have it. There ensued a war and several of the famed Asuras were killed in this war. And so Dithi, the mother of the Daityas, was very unhappy. She asked her husband to help her to be the mother of a son who would be able to kill Indra. Kashyap taught her the incantations and there was one condition which she had to obey with great care. She had to be very pure and clean, and should never make a single mistake regarding this rule. A lapse would mean that her desire would not be granted. Dithi listened to it all carefully. She observed all the rules well and Indra was by her side all the time. He was attending to her wants and by and large, making himself useful to her. She was extremely careful. But one day she was careless and Indra, who was waiting for this chance, took advantage of it and managed to cut the little child inside her into pieces. Try as she might he could not destroy the pieces, and they began to cry. He had cut the child into 7 pieces, and all 7 of them were crying. Dithi was asleep and he did not want her to wake up, and so he told the crying children, "Do not cry. Ma Ruda. Meanwhile Dithi was awake and found that calamity had overtaken her. Indra said, "Mother, you wanted me to be destroyed, and as a matter of self-preservation, I had to resort to this. But your children are not dead. See, I could not kill them, so powerful is the effect of your vrat. My Vajra was ineffective. There are now 7 children instead of 1. Forgive me and take your sons. I could not kill them." Dithi knew that they were not going to kill Indra since her vrat had been tainted by her lapse. She said, "No one can conquer fate, and it is destined that no evil should befall you. Since you were responsible for these children, partly, you can take them with you. Though born of me they will be your brothers. Since you went on saying Maruda to them, they will be famed as the 7 Maruts, and let them be the associates of Vayu, and be with him forever." "Ram," said Vishvamitra, "this is the spot where Dithi performed her tapas, and this is where the 7 Maruts were born. Later the city Vishal was built here by Alambusa, one of the sons of Ikshvaku. His descendants have ruled this country since then. At the present moment Vishal is being ruled by the king by name Sumti. We will spend the night here in this pleasant city, and proceed to Mithila tomorrow." Hearing about the arrival of Vishvamitra and his disciples, Sumti the king came to where he was and paid his respects to him. He looked at the young princes and asked Vishvamitra who they were and how it was possible for these young men, evidently princes, to be accompanying the rishis. Vishvamitra told him about the yugna, and how the young sons of Dasharath had protected the yugna from getting polluted by the Rakshasas, and about how Ram had killed the entire host. Sumti was amazed at the thrilling narration, and after talking to them for some time, went back to his palace. The rishis spent the night there, and early in the morning, they resumed their walk towards the city Mithila. They reached the outskirts of Mithila, and they felt that they were already in Mithila. It was a beautiful city, and they all exclaimed, "How beautiful! What a lovely city!" On the way, Ram discerned a very pleasant-looking ashram. It was isolated, situated in a garden which was almost touching the edge of the city. Ram looked with admiring eyes at the ashram. He saw that there was no one in the ashram. This was very strange, and, with wondering eyes, he turned to Vishvamitra and asked him, "Yonder, there seems to be an ashram. I think it is very beautiful. But it seems to me as though it is empty. This beautiful ashram seems to be uninhabited. How is it possible, my lord? Why is it there is no one in this ashram situated as it is in such sylvan surroundings?" "It is empty because of a great man's anger," said Vishvamitra. He continued, "I will tell you how it came to pass. This same spot was once like the very heaven itself. It was the ashram of the great Rishi Gautam. He performed tapas here for many years. Brahma had created a beautiful woman, and he called her Ahilya. To Gautam was this Ahilya given in marriage. And they lived here for a long time. Once Indra, who is famed for his weakness for beautiful women, came to the neighborhood of this ashram. After making sure that Gautam was away from the hermitage, Indra, assuming the guise of Rishi, entered the apartment where Ahilya was and said, "You are a very beautiful woman, and my mind is lost in you. I desire you." Ahilya could see that it was not the Rishi, though the guise was there. She knew too that it was Indra. She was flattered and pleased that the Lord of the heavens desired her, and she decided to conform to his desire. She agreed to his love-making. When it was time for Gautam to return from the river, then Ahilya realized the extent of her sin, and also the danger which beset her and Indra. She told him, "Go away from here as quickly as you can. I am afraid of the anger of my husband. Please protect yourself from his wrath." Indra laughed and said, "Have no fear. I will take good care of myself and of you too." Indra hurried out of the ashram bent on escaping the eyes of Gautam. He was just late. He saw the Rishi entering the ashram even as he was trying to depart. Gautam had just bathed in the river. He was wearing wet clothes, and with his body covered with ashes he looked like Lord Mahadev. Gautam was able to know the truth about everything which was happening around him, and with the summit and darba in his hands he stood still looking at the apparition before him, Indra assuming the garb of Gautam. It did not take very long for Gautam to guess what had happened. He bent his angry eyes on Indra and said, "Your vanity about your being irresistible to women has made you commit this crime. I now curse you. You will lose your manhood." Gautam then entered the ashram and looked at his wife who was shivering with terror. He said, "You will remain here, unseen by anyone, and you will lie on the ashes and the air will be your food." Years later, when Ram, the powerful son of Dasharath, enters the ashram, it will become sanctified, and you will regain your form, and you will also be cleansed of this sin which you have committed. Gautam left the ashram and went off to perform tapas while Ahilya is waiting for the touch of your blessed feet to purify her, and to sanctify this ashram. Come, let us enter the hermitage and end the torture of this beautiful woman who is now penitent. Ram, Lakshman and Vishvamitra entered the ashram of Gautam and saw the beauty that was Ahilya. Rid as she was of her sin, Ahilya radiated beauty and charm like the moon which has emerged from a screen of clouds. She looked like a sudden flame which leaped out of a cloud of smoke. She was like the sun reflected in a sheet of water. Ram and Lakshman saluted her and flowers rained from the heavens on them. Gautam came there and blessed the princes. The rishis spent some time together and then they parted. The princess took leave of Gautam and his spouse, and with glad hearts the entire group of rishis walked towards Mithila. 18. Mithila. They walked northwards and soon reached the Yugnasala of Janak. Ram was staring with wondering eyes at the elaborate arrangements which had been made for the yajna. He said, "Look, my lord, thousands of well-read Brahmins have now assembled here, and they are all scholars in the Vedas. The ashrams for the rishis have been constructed, and they are so many in number. All the provisions and other materials for the yajna are there and they look like miniature hills. Tell me, where are we supposed to stay? I am so excited at the sight of all this." Vishvamitra chose a spot which he was near the water, and which was not too crowded. They were settling down there. Janak, in the meantime, heard about the arrival of the sage Vishvamitra, and he was greatly excited. Accompanied by his preceptor Sadananda, he walked fast to where the great man was. He received the sage with great humility. Vishvamitra accepted his homage with graciousness and asked Janak about the yajna he was performing. After the exchange of formalities they spent some time together. Janak was immensely pleased that his yajna was to be blessed by the presence of Vishvamitra. He stood humbly before the rishi and said, "All the preparations are being made for the yajna. But before it is performed I feel that I have found the fruits of the yajna since it is blessed by your gracious presence. I am greatly honored. All my desires will be granted, I know, since pundits say that 12 days more are left for the conclusion of the yajna. I am hopeful that you will be with us all the while and be present when the devas come to receive their shares of the havas." Janak prostrated before the sage and accepted the seat indicated to him. Janak then said, "My curiosity has been kindled by the sight of these two young men. They seem to be as valiant as the gods. They walk like young elephants, their gait is as noble as the gait of lions and as graceful as that of the lithe tigers or wild bulls. Their eyes, my lord, are wide and beautiful like the petals of the lotus. They are carrying bows and arrows along with swords. They are like the Ashvini twins, glowing with a handsomeness which is not of this earth. It seems to me as though these two are some gods who have come to the earth by chance. What beautiful eyes! How long! How liquid! Their fingers are protected by guards made of leather, and they look as though they are the sons of Agni. They are young men who have just entered manhood. Their beauty is such that even wish they had been born as women. Such is the charm of these two. It seems to me that they have come here to make me happy and my family too. How is these, who seem to be princess used to luxury, how is it they have walked all this distance? Why have they undertaken this journey, and who are these blessed youths? Who is the fortunate king who has them for sons? They are making this entire Yugnasala beautiful with their handsomeness, like the sun and moon beautify the sky. They seem to be kshatriyas, and since they resemble each other so much they must be brothers. Tell me who they are. Vishvamitra said, They are the sons of Dasharath, the king of Kosala. He then recounted to the king about the yugna at SIDDHASHRAM, and the later journey to MITHILA. He spoke about the visit to the ashram of Gautam, and he concluded, They heard me talk about the Shivdhanus you have with you. I brought them with me so that they can feast their eyes on the great bow of Mahadev which you have been worshipping for generations. They are archers as you can see, and they are naturally eager to see this bow which is famed the world over. When he heard the words of Vishvamitra, Sadananda, the preceptor of Janak, was greatly excited. He was a rishi rich in tapas which he had performed, and he was the son of Gautam. He could not take his eyes off Ram who had granted purity to his mother, and he addressed Vishvamitra, My friend, my mother who had been suffering for all these many years has been seen by the princes. She has worshipped them, and my noble father has come back to his ashram. They have been reunited after a very long time. Great indeed is my happiness at the events which have taken place. He then turned to Ram and said, Welcome to you. You are a scion of the Raghuvams, and you have come here accompanied by the renowned rishi, Vishvamitra. This man has achieved what cannot even be imagined by ordinary mortals. By the power of his tapas he has become a Brahmarshi. This great man has assumed the role of guardian to you. You are extremely fortunate in your godfather. He will not talk about himself. So I will tell you about his magnificent efforts and his achievements. 19. Vishvamitra. Pururavas, the ancestor of the lunar race, had 6 sons, the eldest of whom was Ayu. His descendants were Nahush, his son Yayati, and after Yayati, Puru, and the later kings who were more famed as Pauravas. Vijay was the name of the youngest son of Pururavas. Vijay was the father of a son by name Bhima. Bhima's son was Kanchana and his son was Janu, who later swallowed the river Ganga when she rushed in tumult following the king Bhagirath. Janu's son was Puru and his son was Baleka. His son was Ajak. Ajak had a son by name Kush who had 4 sons, the youngest of whom was Kushnabha. Gadi was the son of Kushnabha. This Vishvamitra is the son of Gadi. He was known in those days as Kaushik, and he was a famous king. He ruled his subjects well, and he was reputed to be a very good king. 20. VASHISHT hosts the king. Once the king had gone to the forest with a large army. He was visiting several places. He visited cities which were ruled by him, and in the course of his journey he saw many beautiful rivers, hills and ashrams nestling at their sides. One such ashram was that of Vashisht, the son of Brahma. From a distance Kaushik could see the flowering trees and shrubs, and he could see the orchards, and there was a small stream flowing slowly past the ashram. Several deer and other tame animals could be seen, and he was very surprised to see siddhas and charanas as well as gandharvas and kinnars. The place was resounding with the music made by the birds which had nests on the trees, and there was peace reigning in the ashram, and in the forest which surrounded the ashram. On going nearer, the king saw several rishis performing tapas, and there were many who were bent on meditation, and who seemed to be lost to the world. It seemed to him that Brahmalok of which he had heard was not in the heavens, but here, on the earth where Vashisht was. It is a rule among Kshatriyas that they should not pass the ashram of a rishi without paying respect to him, and in return, the rishi has to welcome him, and honor him since a king is said to be Narayan himself. Kaushik entered the ashram of Vashisht and prostrated before the great man. The rishi was very pleased with him, and welcomed him with great excitement. He sent for a seat noble enough to befit a king, and he made the king sit on it. He offered fruits and water. Kaushik received all these with a humility becoming a great king, and they spoke to each other about general things. Vashisht asked the conventional questions which should be asked. He said, I hope your subjects are happy under your rule which is sure to be righteous. I hope your servants are well behaved and obedient, all your enemies are subdued. Is your army large and powerful? Is your treasury full? Are your children well and happy and obedient? Kaushika answered them all in the affirmative. Each had great respect for the other, and they spent a long time talking about many things. After a long time had passed, Vashisht said, I want you to accept my hospitality. It is rare and great honor that you have visited our ashram with your army. I want to entertain you. You are a righteous king, and a good man. I am pleased with you. You are to be honored and give me the pleasure of doing so. Kaushik was touched by the words of the rishi and spoke very humbly and said, Your words full of affection have done more than a feast can do. You have already given us fruits and milk. The sight of you has made us pure for birth after birth. What need is there for a feast? You are the person who should be honored as a god, and it is not right that you should say I deserve to be honored. I will soon be taking leave of you to continue my journey. Kaushik felt that it would only embarrass the rishi to feed so many of them, and to save him this he rose up very tactfully as if to go. VASHISHT would have none of it. Again and again he insisted that the king with his retinue should stay and accept his hospitality. Finally Kaushik had to accede to his request and said, So be it, my lord. You are so eager to play host to us, and I have not a chance to escape from your goodness. Laughing together they walked out of the ashram. VASHISHT called out, Surbi. Child. Shabal. Come here. Kaushik was wondering whom he was calling, and even as he was thinking about it a beautiful cow came and stood before VASHISHT and said, You called me father. Kaushik saw that the cow was unbelievably beautiful. She was of a lovely shape and her hide was mottled black and white. Her eyes were soft and gentle and VASHISHT said, Shabal, this is the king of the country and his name is Kaushik. He has come with his army and I wish to entertain him and his retinue. Prepare for them a feast with all the things necessary. Let there be nothing wanting, and I want them all to go back satisfied. Hurry and create everything. Shabala was Kamdanu, the divine cow which rose up out of the milk ocean when the Devas and Asuras turned it for Amrit. She had been given to VASHISHT. She created a feast for the royal guest and his attendants. There were all kinds of food and drinks of every type imaginable. The food was such that it suited every palate. There were heaps and heaps of all the edibles they could think of and the guests were served with affection and care so that everyone had his fill of food and was satisfied. Kaushik was extremely happy and he saluted the rishi with his men. He then said, My lord, never in my life have I been so entertained and never have I tasted food like what I ate today. I want to ask a favor of you. I was greatly impressed by the power of Shabala, your cow. A cow such as she should be in the possession of the king of the country. Bounty like hers should benefit everyone. Please give her to me and in return, I will give you 100,000 cows. This cow is a jewel and any precious jewel rightfully belongs to the king. Please give her to me. VASHISHT was taken aback at the words of Kaushik. But he composed himself and softly said, I hate to refuse anyone anything. But Shabala is someone different. Not even my exchange for 100,000 cows will I give my Surbi. You may say that you will give me heaps and heaps of silver and gold. But it will be of no use. I will not part with Shabala, and that is certain. Kaushik stood as though stunned. VASHISHT's eyes were now wet and he said, O king, Shabala is part of me and I cannot be separated from her. It is like trying to part the fame from a man who is famous. All my religious rites are performed because of the gifts of Shabala. I cannot give her to you. Kaushik would not give up. He said, I will give you 1,000 elephants fully caparisoned in gold and silks. I will give you 800 horses and chariots. I will give you more if you so desire. I will give you 1 crore of Kapila cows. Please give this one cow Shabala to me. If you are so desirous, I will give you gold and precious stones without number. VASHISHT shook his head sadly but firmly and said, No. She is my jewel and she is my wealth. She is my everything and she is my very life. My tapas is all comprised in her. What is the use of dilating on the subject? I will never part with her, and it is futile on your part to offer me wealth. I have no use for any of the things you mention. I have Shabala and she will be with me forever. 21. A frustrated king. Kaushik was a Kshatriya, and anger was second nature to him. He had never before been balked in his desire, and he had set his heart on this wonderful cow. He became very angry and he walked out of the ashram. He commanded his servants to take the cow by force, and they led her out of the shed where she was stationed. She thought to herself, "Why has the noble Vashisht abandoned me? What have I done that he should punish me thus? The servants of the king are dragging me away from here, and my father has not done anything about it." She was crying and her tears were falling fast. Her sighs were audible and she told herself, "I will go now to him, and ask him why he has allowed this insult to me by the servants of the king." She suddenly broke away from the hands of her captors, and ran with the speed of wind, and reached the presence of Vashisht. She fell at his feet and asked, "Why have you forsaken me, father? Even as you are looking on, these men are carrying me away. Why are you allowing this?" Vashisht said, "Child, you have not been in the wrong, and I am not punishing you. I will never forsake you. This king is powerful and he is dragging you away forcibly from my ashram. This army of his, 1 in number is his, and he thinks he is invincible, and hence his action." Shabala said, "My lord, what is the power of a mere king in the presence of a Brahmin? Brahmabala is far superior to that of a Kshatriya. Your greatness is unequaled in all the several worlds. Kaushik is powerful no doubt, and a great Kshatriya. Give me permission, father, to show him that even a weakling like me, when blessed by you, can be more powerful than he is. I will punish his arrogance and humble his pride." Vashisht looked at the cow whose breath was coming in gasps, so angry was she. Her eyes had become red and her tail was lifted up in anger. The rishi smiled at her and said, "All right, I grant you the permission. Create in a moment an army which can tackle the king's army." Saurabhi just shook her body once and there appeared a huge army, hundreds of warriors, and they went to fight with the army of Kaushik. Finding that his army was being defeated by this one created by the cow, Kaushik, with his red with anger, entered the fight, and fought with the army of Surbhi. Seeing her army suffering at the hands of the king, Surbhi created more warriors to join in the fight. Even as the army got thinned out, Surbhi kept on creating more and more. Kaushik was now joined by his sons, and all together they attacked Vashisht himself. The rishi, with a hunkara, burnt all of them, and only a heap of ashes was left of the sons of the king. Kaushik was heartbroken. His army was gone and his children were dead. He was completely broken. He was like the ocean without its power, like a serpent with its fangs pulled out, like a bird whose wings had been severed. His pride was humbled and his face was like the setting sun, all its fierceness was gone. Without a word, with his head hanging down, with his eyes bent on the ground, Kaushik left the ashram of Vashisht and went back to his kingdom. Kaushik's anger was unappeased and his thoughts were always hovering around the humiliating defeat at the hands of the cow's army in the ashram of Vashisht. Kaushik was disgusted with everything and he made a son of his stay and mind the kingdom. He then went to the forest. He went to the slopes of the Himavan where the Kinnars were, and he began to perform a great tapas with a desire to please Lord Mahadev. After a time the Lord was satisfied with the penance of Kaushik and he appeared before him and asked him, "Why are you performing this tapas? What is it that you desire? I will grant you anything you ask for." Kaushik prostrated before him and singing his praises, he said, "My lord, if you are pleased with me then grant me this boon. I should be proficient in archery. Grant me that I am master of all the divine astras. Please be gracious enough to accede to my request." Mahadev said, "I have given them all to you. Go in peace." Kaushik went back to his kingdom. His self-respect was restored and with it, his pride came back to him. It grew tenfold. Now, he told himself, Vashisht, the great rishi, is as good as dead. How can he withstand the astras which are presided over by the gods? 22. The power of the Brahmin. Kaushik went to the ashram of Vashisht and without any warning, he began to dispatch the astras one after another. The birds and animals which were in the ashram rushed out in panic. The disciples who were living with the rishi were also startled by the sudden harassment, and they fled from there in fear. The ashram and its surroundings were now as bare as soil which is salty and fit for nothing. There was silence reigning, and it was frightening. Vashisht was extremely angry with this cruelty on the part of Kaushik. He told himself, for no reason at all, this king is bent on troubling me again and again. I will destroy him like the sun burns up snow. Vishtha came and stood before Kaushik and said, this peaceful hermitage, the heaven of mental peace, has been destroyed by you, and I am very angry with you. You do not know anything about properties and you are a fool. I am going to kill you. Visitha lifted up his staff which began to glow like the staff of Yama, the Lord of Death, like the fire which burns without smoke at the end of the Yuga. Kaushik was not frightened by his words since he had the divine astras with him. He invoked the astra presided over by Agni, the god of fire. Vashisht hurled his danda at Kaushik and said, so you have come to challenge me with your divine astras. Let me see your prowess. I am here standing in front of you, and let me what you can do. Show me. Let us see if your Kshatriya Bala is great or if my Brahma Bala is. You fool. You are a disgrace to the Kshatriya clan to which you belong. You will now see the superiority of the divine powers of a Brahmin. The astra sent by Kaushik was rushing towards Vashisht, spitting fire in all directions. When it touched the Brahma danda which Vashisht had planted it in front of him, the fire was extinguished like when it was touched by water. Kaushik then sent the astras, Varna, Radra, Indra, Pajapata, Ishika, and his brows were knit with anger and frustration when he found each one of them swallowed up by the Brahma danda. Manavastra was sent in vain, and Gandharv, the great Jairamhana, and Swapena. Even Vajra, the astra presided over by Indra, was futile. Kaushik sent the Pashas, Kala Pasha, Varn Pasha, and Brahma. The Chakras followed and many other astras which were reputed to be invincible. Not one of them was capable of superseding the Brahma danda of Vasishtha. By now the Devas had assembled in the skies to witness this glorious scene, where the power of the Brahmin was proving itself to be greater than all the other powers in the three worlds. In despair the king sent the great Brahmastra, and everyone was watching its progress with bated breath. Even the Brahmastra was swallowed and followed the same path as the others. Vashisht was now glowing like the god of fire, and every pore in his skin was spitting fire. The Brahma danda was resplendent, it was like a pillar of fire. The rishis from the skies and from all over the heavens proclaimed, Vashisht, your power is the greatest power we have ever known. You are capable of bearing any of these fires and making them pale into insignificance because of your glory. The good King Kaushik has been vanquished by you. Please abandon your wrath and let not the world suffer because of your anger. Vashisht accordingly calmed himself and his Brahma danda also. As for Kaushik, he threw down his bow and arrows and, with a long sigh, exclaimed, Fie on the Bala of a Kshatriya. The only Bala worthwhile is the Bala of a Brahmin. With his mere staff this man has been able to hold at bay all the astras which had been given to me by Mahadev. I have decided to perform tapas so that I will become like him. I will be equal to him in Bala, and that will be Brahma Bala, and not Kshatriya Bala. I will realize Brahmatva with my tapas. Kaushik's heart was full of diverse feelings. His heart was sore with the defeat he had met with at the hands of Vashisht. His sighs were like the hisses of a serpent which had been angered by the beatings of a stick. His hatred for the rishi was also immense. With so many emotions raging in his heart, Kaushik proceeded towards the south, and began to perform intense tapas with the desire to become a Brahmarshi. Years passed. When 1,000 years had passed, Brahma the Creator came to him and said, Kaushik, your tapas has been so intense that the heavens are very pleased with your concentration. You have achieved what seemed to be impossible. You will, from now on, be known to as Rajarshi Kaushik. Having granted the boon, Brahma went back to Satyaloka. Kaushik, however, was not as pleased as he ought to have been. On the contrary, he was very unhappy. His grief was intense and so was his frustration. He wanted the world and he was granted a handful of sand. He told himself, after all these years of tapas I have been called a Rajarshi. I feel that I have not done enough. I will try again. 23. Trishanku of the solar race. In the solar race was a king by name Trishanku. He was a good king famed for his righteousness, as all the kings of the race were. All on a sudden he was filled with a strange desire. He wanted to reach the heavens with the human body. He approached his guru VASHISHT with this desire in view, and asked him to perform a yugna, which would help him realize his dream. VASHISHT refused, saying, "This is an unnatural and impious desire on your part. I cannot help you to reach the heavens with this body." Trishanku was sorely disappointed. He renounced his throne and traveled to the south. There he met sons of VASHISHT and asked them to help him achieve the impossible. They were 100 in number, and they had performed tapas for several years, and they were rich in the wealth of tapas. Trishanku approached them and saluting them with reverence he stood with folded palms and said, "I have surrendered myself to you. I am the king whose guru is your dear father. I request you to perform for me a yugna which will make me reach the heavens with this human body." Guru VASHISHT, the famous rishi, refused to help me and asked me to look for someone else to do it for me. I have no one else but the sons of my guru, and so I have come to you for help. Rich as you are with tapas, I beseech you to help me. It is well known that your ancestors have been the gurus for the line of Ikshvaku all these years. You are like gods to us, and you should grant me my prayer. The sons of VASHISHT were very angry with the king. They said, "You are very stupid and also sinful. When our father has refused to perform a sacrifice saying that it is against all dharma, how dare you approach us with the same request? VASHISHT has been the Kulaguru for the line of kings ever since Ikshvaku, as you rightly observed, and this VASHISHT has not approved of your ambition. He has told you that it is not possible to do such a thing. How did you expect us to agree to do something which our father has not sanctioned? You are indeed childish in your desire. Go back to the city and resume your kingly duties. We are not prepared to insult our father by taking up your cause." The king was very unhappy at their reply. He said, "If my guru refuses to help me and his sons too, what am I going to do? I have only one course open to me. I will go in search of another guru who will grant me what I want." The sons of VASHISHT were furious with him. They could not brook the insult to their father and to themselves. Therefore they cursed him and said, "You will, from this moment, become a Chandala." Having cursed him, they returned to their ashrams. The unhappy king returned to his city, with his heart filled with pain and disappointment. When the night had passed, the king found that he had become a Chandala. His clothes had turned black and his skin was black. His neck was adorned with flowers which were wild, and the ornaments of gold which he had been wearing had turned to crude ones of iron. When he entered the city, the people jeered at him, and they could not recognize him. Even his ministers were unable to believe him when he told them who he was. He was chased out of the city by the citizens who made fun of his appearance. Trishanku thought for a while and decided that there was one rishi who would surely help him. He had heard so much about the intense tapas which Kaushik had performed, and about his becoming a Rajarshi because of his tapas. Trishanku hurried towards the spot where Kaushik was and saw him absorbed in his tapas. The king stood by and Kaushik felt someone standing near him, and opened his eyes. He looked at the dark and ugly Chandala standing at some distance. His eyes and his face were the very picture of woe, and Kaushik, whose heart was always ready with sympathy, felt that this man was suffering intensely. He called him near and asked him, "I can see that you are Trishanku, the king of Ayodhya. You are a great warrior and a good king. What can I do for you? I know that this Chandala form of yours is the result of a curse. Tell me what I can do to help you." Hearing the words of affection which were spoken by Kaushik, the king was overcome with gratitude, and his eyes filled with tears. He said, "My guru VASHISHT and his sons have refused to grant me my desires. I asked them to make me reach the heavens with this human body, and they would not grant me my wish. I have performed 100 yagnas. But evidently that is not enough. I have never once in my life spoken an untruth, and I will not do so hereafter. I swear that I have ruled my subjects with great care, and I have never once transgressed the rules which a kshatriya should follow. I have always tried to please the elders and have always set my mind on them. Seeing that all this seems to be futile when it cannot grant me a small desire, I realize that man's attempts are always useless and fate is the only powerful refuge of all. I have now come to you to ask you if you will help me realize the dream in my heart, to reach the heavens with this mortal body. I have no one else to whom I can go with this request, and it is up to you to help me and prove that even fate can be subdued by the attempts of man. Kaushik was filled with pity and compassion for this king, who had been so unfortunate. He spoke in a soft and gentle voice and he said, "O king, you are welcome to be with me in my home. The world knows what a righteous monarch you are. I have decided to help you. Do not be afraid. I will summon all the rishis and ask them to help me perform a yagna. With this form, with this chandala form, which your guru's curse has given you, with this form, I say, I will make you ascend the heavens. Kaushik has been approached as a refuge by you, and you cannot be sent back empty-handed. I will do what you want me to." Kaushik then instigated his sons to collect all that was necessary for the performance of a yagna. He summoned his disciples and said, "Go and ask all the rishis to come here at my request. Let them bring their entire ashrams with them." The disciples went to all the quarters to bring the many rishis. They came, all of them, except the sons of VASHISHT and the father too. VASHISHT's sons' words were, very comical indeed. "A strange sight this yagna will be with a kshatriya to perform the yagna, and with a chandala as the object of the yagna. We wonder how the participants will react, the divine beings who have to receive their shares of the devas at the hands of one who is not a Brahmin. They will have to eat the food touched by a chandala, and served by a kshatriya since Kaushik is not a Brahmin." When he heard these words Kaushik was highly incensed, and with his eyes red with anger he cursed them to be nishadhas. Kaushik then addressed the rishis who had come there at his request and said, "This is the king Trishanku, a descendant of Ikshvaku. He is a righteous king famed in all the 3 worlds. He has come to me with a request. He wants to reach the heavens with this body. I have promised to help him, and I appeal to all of you to assist me in this my attempt to help a good king." Hearing his words the rishi said to themselves, "Kaushik is a man with a very short temper. His anger is dangerous. If we do not assist him as he asks to, he is sure to get angry, and we can never guess what he will do if his anger turns against us. It is better to help him perform the yagna." Kaushik was the yajaka and the rishis were all willing to do the needful. The yagna proceeded in the proper manner. At the final stage when the devas was to be offered, Kaushik summoned the devas one by one to accept their shares. But not one of them came. Their disapproval of the yagna was obvious. Kaushik was furious at this insult. But he composed himself and, with his eyes blazing with anger, and with his frame trembling with fury, he raised the sruva, the spoon with which ghee is poured into the sacrificial fire, aloft and said, "Look on the power of my tapas. I will raise this king to the heavens with this human body. I command you, Trishanku, rise in the air, and reach the heavens with this body of yours. If at all I have performed any tapas, I give the result of all that with this end in view, to raise you to the heavens. Rise, O king, and reach the heavens." 24. A new heaven. Everyone was watching with bated breath. Suddenly Trishanku began to rise above the ground. He folded his palms and he saluted the rishi. He rose in the air and even as they were all looking, he vanished into the clouds. Indra was not pleased with this intruder. He said, "Trishanku, go back to the earth. You are not fit to dwell in the heavens. Cursed as you are by your guru. We are not prepared to consider you as one of us." Trishanku was pushed rudely and he found himself falling downwards. He called out to the great Kaushik and said, "My lord, they have thrown me out and I am falling down. Save me, save me. Kaushik was very angry and very sad too. He could not brook the cruelty of the Devas and their selfishness. He said, "Stay where you are." The fall of Trishanku was arrested halfway. Then, in the presence of all, Kaushik, like another Brahma, began to create a new heaven for Trishanku. In the southern direction he created the 7 rishis and other stars. He created the clusters of stars. He then said, "I am going to create another Indra who will eclipse the present Indra." He began to do so and to create other Devas too. There was great commotion in the heavens, and the Devas and rishis from the heavens approached Kaushik with humility and said, "Please listen to our words, Kaushik. It has been said that one who has been cursed by his guru cannot reach the heavens, and so we did what we did. It was in no way meant to cast aspersions on you or your greatness." Hearing their words, Kaushik said, "You are jealous of him, and so you treated him thus. I will not let him come back to the earth. He is a righteous king, and he does not deserve punishment." The Devas said, "We will agree to anything you say." "I will not go back on my promise to Trishanku," said Kaushik. "The heaven I have created for him will be permanent. The stars and the 7 rishis and the entire galaxy, which have been created by me, will be permanent. Indras may come and go, but the heavens I have built for Trishanku, and the world of Trishanku will last forever." "So be it," said Indra and the Devas with great humility. "This world of stars and gods which you have created out of your tapas will remain forever, proclaiming your greatness. Trishanku will rule the heaven built for him like another Indra. All the stars will move in their orbits for him, and his fame and name will last forever." Kaushik was satisfied by their promise, and Trishanku was happy. The Devas went back to their abode, and the rishis to theirs. Only Kaushik was left all alone, and his treasury of tapas was empty. He had given it all for the sake of a king whose suffering could not be borne by Kaushik. 25. SUNASHEPHA. Trishanku had reached the heavens which had been created by Kaushik. He told himself, "This tapas which I performed in the south has had interruptions, and I have used it all up. I will go towards the west and begin all over again. I will choose a spot where I will be concealed from everyone. I will be hidden from the sight of people, and on the shores of some lake I will have my ashram and perform a tapas there, undisturbed." On the holy shores of a lake, Kaushik began his tapas again in the holy spot by name Pushkarakshetra. Trishanku had a son by name Harishchandra. He had no sons, and he prayed to Varun, the lord of the oceans. He said, "All I want is to have a son. When a son is born to me, I will perform a yugna with my son as offering and give him to you." In course of time a son was born to the king, and he called him Rohita. Varun came to him and asked him to keep his word. He said, "You must keep your promise. You agreed to perform a sacrifice with this child as the offering." The king said, "A new-born child is not clean. It is only after 10 days that it becomes clean. I will give him to you after that." 10 days later Varun came to claim the child, and the king said, "A yugna pasha has to have teeth. So wait till the child cuts his teeth." When Varun came again, the king postponed the gift by saying that the milk teeth should fall, and then that they should grow again. And so it went on. In his attachment to his son, the king kept on thinking up excuses. "Let my son wear armor. A kshatriya is pure only when he wears an armor." Rohita, in the meantime, came to know about all that had happened. He wanted to escape his doom by running away to the forest with a bow in his hand. The king was afflicted with the dread disease called Mahodara, which Varun caused as a punishment. Hearing about it, the prince Rohita started to go back home, to save his father. Indra stopped him. He told the young prince that he should go and visit all the holy rivers. 1 year passed, and again it happened, and again. 5 years passed, and finally he made up his mind to go back to his kingdom and see his father. On the way, Rohita met a Brahmin whose name was GAUTAM'S. He was traveling with his wife and 3 sons. The prince thought that his father's disease would be cured, and that he himself could escape death by sacrificing someone else. He saluted the Brahmin, who stood silent to find out what the prince wanted. Rohita said, "My lord, I will give you 100,000 cows. Are you willing to trade one of your sons for it?" The Brahmin wanted more details, and the prince told him about the predicament of his father and himself. Ajigarath said, "My eldest son will not part from me. He is too dear to me, and I will not be able to live without him." The wife of the Brahmin said, "My husband, the Bhargav, has said that our eldest son is dear to him and therefore cannot be given. I want you to know that the youngest child is dear to me, and I cannot bear to give him up. It is always the way of the world that the eldest is the father's favorite and the youngest that of the mother." The second son was called Sunashepha. He spoke in a soft and sad voice, "Listen to me, O prince. My father favors my elder brother and my mother, my younger brother. It is as good as understood that I have been sold to you by my parents for 100,000 cows. Take me with you." The prince gave the number of cows to the Brahmin, and was happy since he had the young boy with him, who would be sacrificed instead of himself. It was noon when Rohita and Sunashepha reached the holy spot named Pushkara. There the young boy saw Kaushik, who was absorbed in his tapas. The child was hungry, thirsty and very depressed because he realized that he was unwanted by his parents, or else would they have sold him for 100,000 cows. And they knew that he was going to be killed, and yet they gave him away. He knew that this Rishi Kaushik was distantly related to the Bhargav clan, and he felt that he had a claim on him. Impulsively he rushed to the presence of Kaushik and fell on his lap sobbing. Rudely awakened from his trance, Kaushik looked at the intruder. He saw a young boy with a woebegone face, and he was sobbing his heart out. The child said, "I have no father and no mother. As for kinsfolk, I have none. You are my only refugee. You must save my life. I have been told that you are very noble, powerful and compassionate, that you can never bear to see anyone who is unhappy. I saw you, and I have come to you for help." Kaushik wanted to know what was worrying the young boy, and he told him the entire story. Kaushik's heart was full of love for this foundling. Sunashepha said, "My lord, since my father has sold me for the purpose of a yagna, I do not want that yagna to be spoilt, nor do I want to lose my life. Only you can work things in such a way that both these can be accomplished. I want to live long, perform tapas and then reach the heavens. You are the succor for unfortunate beings like me, and you are a father to me since I am now an orphan." Kaushik pacified the weeping boy with gentle words and promises, and he summoned his sons and said, "Parents create their children so that they will guide them to heaven, to assure them of a place in the other world. I want you to justify your births. Here is this child who has come to me to save him. You are all well-read, and you have acquired wealth in the form of tapas. Do what is expected of you by me. One of you should become the Yugna Pashu, for the sacrifice of King Harishchandra. Thus I will save this child, and the yagna will also come to a successful conclusion. Will you do it?" The sons led by Madhuchandas considered it a big joke, and laughing at their father said, "Father, how can you find it in your heart to abandon your sons for the sake of a foundling who weeps his heart out? It is as improbable that we should accept your suggestion, as it is to eat the flesh of a dog." Kaushik's anger rose to the surface and he said, "Your behavior and your words are unworthy of your birth, and you are not fit to be my sons. Those who disobey their father are not fit to be honored. Like the sons of VASHISHT, you will also be chandalas, and eat the flesh of dogs for 1,000 years. Kaushik assured Sunashepha that he would save his life somehow. He pondered for a long while and then said, "You must go with Rohita, and allow yourself to be tied to the sacrificial pole, Upasthamha. They will place garlands of red flowers round your neck and smear red sandal paste on your body. They will tie you up with ropes which have been purified with incantations. I will teach you these 2 verses, and in your mind repeat them till you have memorized them. Then, during the yagna, sing these hymns. The yagna will be as good as successful in its completion." Sunashepha learnt the hymns with great care. He then went to Rohita, who had been resting all the while, and said, "Let us hurry to the spot where the yagna is to be performed. I am well prepared for it. The prince was happy to see him a willing victim. And they hurried to the presence of the sick king. Harishchandra was immensely pleased with the turn of events. He went to the Yugnavala and began to perform the yugna, though he was sorely afflicted with the disease Mahodara. The young boy was tied to the Upasthamha, and when they were getting ready to sacrifice him, the young boy began to sing in his childish treble the hymns taught to him by Kaushik. The Yugnavala was silent with surprise and later, with admiration for the noble hymns which were in praise of the Devas, Indra, Varun and the others who were entitled to a share of the Havas. Indra was pleased and so was Varun. They appeared in person and granted long life to Sunashephha. The king was forgiven for his lapse, and he was cured of his disease. The experiences he had gone through because of his excessive attachment to his son had taught him a lesson, and Harishchandra wanted to learn the Brahmavidya from Kaushik. The rishi was only too happy to tell him, and after that, Harishchandra was a changed man. Kaushik had 100 sons. One of them was called by the name Madhuchandas, and so all the 100 were called as the Madhuchandas brothers. After the yagna performed by Harishchandra, Kaushik adopted Sunashephha as his own and told his sons, "He is your brother. I want you to treat him as your elder brother. He was born a Bhrigu but he is now one of you." The older sons of Kaushik were not happy at the suggestion of their father, and they would not accept Sunashephha as their elder brother. Kaushik was of course furious and he cursed them too, to be low-born. There were 50 of them. The other 50 led by Madhuchandas fell at his feet and said, "We are willing to obey you in everything. We are very happy to accept Sunashephha as our elder brother." The father was naturally pleased with them and said, "You are good sons and I am pleased with you. Led by this new son of mine you will be known as the Kaushiks, and our house will be famed as the Kaushik Gotra." Kaushik pursued his tapas for 1,000 years. At the end of it Brahma appeared before him and said, "Because of your tapas you have become a rishi, not just a rajarshi." Kaushik was not pleased with becoming a rishi. He was determined to achieve the status of Brahmarshi, and he began to perform tapas intensely. He went to the north and there he pursued his tapas. 26. Kaushik's lapses. The Devas were worried about Kaushik's tapas and the foremost of them was Indra, who was afraid that his status as Indra might be in danger. He decided to disturb the tapas and he summoned to his presence Menaka, the Apsara of his court. He said, "You are the best among the Apsaras. I want your help. I will tell you what I want you to do." Kaushik is performing tapas and he is glowing like the noonday sun, so fierce is the tapas he has accumulated. If he succeeds there is every danger of my being pushed out of my throne. I want you to go to his presence. He has all his senses under control, and with single-mindedness he is absorbed in mediation. With your beauty, your youth and your winning ways, you should tempt him and make him succumb to the weakness which is innate in the heart of every man. Make him abandon his tapas, and I will be pleased with you. Menaka was afraid to go. She said, "My lord, I have been told that he is very powerful, and that he is very easily angered. Think of the combination power, tapas and anger. How can I survive these? You are afraid of him, and yet you want a weak woman like me to go to him. How can I face him? He has cursed the sons of VASHISHT. He was a Kshatriya, and by his own efforts he has become a rishi now. He has been like Brahma in creating a new heaven for the sake of a king. Such a powerful tapasvan will surely have gone beyond the sway of the senses, and how can I dare to go near him? What if he curses me? If you assure me that he will not curse me, I will do what you ask me to do. Send Manmath and Vasanth with me. Make the wind Mandanila to come with us. Under such pleasing conditions which are always conducive to the act of love, I will try to tempt Kaushik, and let us hope I succeed in my attempts." Menaka went down to the earth and in the neighborhood of the spot where Kaushik was, she spent her time waiting for the proper time, when she could make her appearance. One day Kaushik got up from the mediation, and was moving about. Menaka thought that the chance had come her way now, the chance she was for. And she was not wrong. Looking at her beautiful figure and her winning ways Kaushik was bewitched, and he succumbed to her charms. 5 years passed and another 5 years. He woke up suddenly one day out of this bewitchment. He realized that 10 years, 10 precious years had been wasted. His tapas had been disturbed and he had lost much of what he had accumulated. He was full of anger and sorrow. He then realized that it was the work of the devas who were set on disturbing tapas performed by anyone. When she saw him like this, Menaka was overcome with fear lest he should vent his anger on her. She stood with folded palms and her tears were trembling on her lashes. But Kaushik was not angry with her. He told her that he was going north to continue where he had left off. He went to the banks of the river Kaushiki and his tapas was terrible. After a long time the devas, pleased with him, came there with Brahma and they said, Kaushik, you are now a Maharshi. You have performed severe penances. We say that you are the greatest of the rishis. Kaushik was neither pleased nor sad at the words of Brahma. He said, with my tapas I have earned the title Maharshi. But tell me, have I become one who has conquered the senses? Brahma said, no, you are not a Jitendriya, not completely. Kaushik's face fell and Brahma said, you must try to achieve that also, perfect control of the senses. The most difficult part of his tapas was performed by him for the next few years. He held his arms aloft and he was bent on starving himself, in the midst of 5 fires during the summer days, and in the midst of water during winter. Only air was his food. His tapas became intense and, as was his custom, Indra summoned Ramba and told her, go and try to tempt Kaushik as Menaka did before. Ramba was very much afraid of Kaushik and said, I dare not. His anger will be unbearable. But Indra assured her that he would himself be with her. The nightingale would sing from the branches of the mango tree near where Kaushik was, and on that tree would be stationed Manmath and Indra. While he was absorbed in his mediation, Kaushik was disturbed by the music of the nightingale. He smelt the scent of the flowers which bloom only during the season Vasanth. He opened his eyes and they lighted on the very beautiful woman standing before him. He knew that it was the work of Indra, or else how could Vasanth come along before it was due? And again, how could a woman find her way into the heart of the terrible forest unless she had been brought there? His anger came up once more and he cursed Ramba. You have agreed to try and tempt me by your wiles, and by your wanton ways, and rob me of my tapas. You will be turned into stone, and stay on this earth for 1,000 years. The moment he said it he repented his action and said, yes, Brahma is right. I am not a Jitendriya. I am not able to subdue my anger. So long as the senses are unconquered, the Atman will not attain tranquility. Hereafter I will never be angry and I will not speak a word. I will drain myself of all feelings and perform tapas once again. Then and only then will I attain the fruits of my tapas. 27. VISHVAMITRA, the Brahmarshi. Kaushik abandoned the north and walked towards the east. And there again he performed his tapas. For 1,000 years he was silent, and the world and the heavens were all being burnt up by the fire of his penance. He had become as thin as a twig, and he had surmounted several obstacles placed in the way of his achievement. He banished anger from his mind completely. One day as he broke his fast and cooked some rice for himself, just as he was about to eat it, Indra, taking the form of a Brahmin, came to him and begged him for food. Kaushik spoke not a word but gave the entire food to the Brahmin, and went back to his mediation without eating. His tapas became more and more fierce. Even the air which he was breathing he controlled so that he could stay without breathing for a long while. Smoke began to emulate from his head, and the worlds were suffering because of his penance, and the devas and others went to Brahma and told him, Kaushik now glows with the greatness of his tapas. If you do not grant him what he has been wanting all these years, his tapas is sure to destroy all the 3 worlds. His glory is so great that even the sun and fire have lost their luster. The seas are lashing their waves in torment, and the mountains are spitting fire. The earth is trembling, and there is storm everywhere. Kaushik is like the great fire at the end of the Yuga, and it is up to you to save the universe from him." Brahma hurried to the presence of Kaushik and said, "We welcome you, Brahmarshi. We have been pleased with the tapas you have performed. With your efforts, you have achieved the status of Brahmarshi. You will live very long. May you prosper." A thin flash of pleasure lit up the face of Kaushik. He prostrated before Brahma and said, "If what you have granted me is really true, if I am a Brahmarshi, if I am long-lived by your grace, let the Vedas accept me as Brahmarshi. I have but one desire. VASHISHT, your son, should recognize me as such." They brought VASHISHT to the presence of the great Kaushik, and he smiled with affection at Kaushik and said, "You are a great man, Brahmarshi. There is no doubt about it." Kaushik honored VASHISHT, and he was free to go as he pleased. The thought that he had achieved the seemingly impossible made him happy, but he was not proud nor conceited. He was ever bent on doing good to others, and he was called Vishvamitra, the friend of the universe. Sadanand said, "This great Vishvamitra is the very personification of tapas." Janak stood in front of Vishvamitra and said, "It has been an act of infinite kindness on your part to have come here to my yajna with the sons of the monarch. Today I have heard in detail the sacred story of how you became Vishvamitra, the friend of the universe. How well the name fits you, my lord. You are bent on doing nothing but good to mankind, and something tells me that you have come here to do me a great favor." The sun had nearly set, and they broke up their session. The king went back to his palace and the rishis to their hermitages. Ram was silent, and so was Lakshman. The story of Vishvamitra and his struggle was too sublime to be talked about. 28. The Bow of Mahadev. Early in the morning King Janak went to the presence of Vishvamitra. He spoke to him and to the prince's words of welcome and added, "Lord, you have come to me with the intention of blessing me. I know that. Tell me if there is anything particular which I should do. Please command me as to what should be done to make you happy." The rishis was impressed by the humility of Janak, and he spoke in a soft persuasive voice, "As I told you yesterday, these two young men are Kshatriyas, the sons of the monarch Dasharath, and they are called Ram and Lakshman. Their fame as archers has spread the world over. It is but natural for them to be impatient to see the bow of Mahadev which you have been worshipping for years. I can assure you that great good fortune is awaiting you, and the bow will be the cause of it. Ask the bow to be brought here. Let them see it." King Janak said, "I will relate to the young men the story of the bow, about how it came about that the house of the Videhas has been honored by its possession. Nimai was a famed monarch in our family, and the sixth king, after him, was Devarata. This bow was given to him. He had been asked to keep it with him, and to guard it very carefully. As for this bow, in ancient times, when Daksha performed a yajna, he insulted Mahadev by refusing to give him his share of the havas. The Devas, who were afraid of Daksha, countenanced this insult to the Lord. Mahadev went to the Yugnasala with this bow in his hand, and looking at the Devas sneeringly he said, 'Since you allowed this injustice, I am going to separate your jeweled heads from your bodies.' The Devas rushed to him at once, and they fell at his feet and craved pardon. Mahadev is a god who is easily incensed and easily pacified. His anger vanished and the Devas were saved. This bow was then given to my ancestor, and he was asked to guard it as a treasure, as indeed it is. Once when I was planning to perform another yajna, I was plowing on the ground, and when the ground was split by the plow I saw that in the furrow made by the plow was a beautiful child. It was a delicate-looking girl, and since I was then childless I took her to my queen, and the child grew up to be my eldest daughter. Discovered as she was by the tip of the plow, I have called her Seeta. She seems to me to be the incarnation of Devi Lakshmi herself. She is no ordinary mortal. I decided to give her in marriage to a hero. This was after several princes came to me and asked me for her hand. I was not willing to give her away, and so I told them that she can be given only to the one who can fulfill my stipulation. They asked me what it was, and I said, 'She will be given to the one who will lift this bow and string it.' My lord, not one of them was able even to lift it. Offended by me, as they thought, they joined together and surrounded Mithila on all sides, seeking to destroy me and my kingdom. I was not able to withstand the onslaught of so many kings who had combined their forces, and for a year, I suffered. I performed tapas, and the Devas sent their divine army to help me. The enemies were vanquished and Mithila was saved from destruction. This is the bow which has such a long story which goes with it. I will certainly have it brought here for Ram and Lakshman to see. Janak commanded his ministers to have the bow brought to the presence of Vishvamitra. They went to the palace of the king. The bow was placed so that everyone could see it. The great bow was worshipped with flowers and incense every day. It took 5,000 stalwarts to drag the cart holding the bow. The cart had 8 large wheels and, with great difficulty, the cart was dragged where the king was seated with his guests. When the iron casket containing the bow came into view, they all stood up as one man and honored the bow of Mahadev. Janak stood humbly before Vishvamitra and said, "This is that famed bow which has broken the pride of so many kings. This is the bow of Mahadev. No Deva, no Asura nor Yaksh has been able to lift it, even, not to mention stringing it or using it. No Gandharv nor Kinnar nor a Rakshas has been able to lift it. What then can be said about a mere man? Please show the bow to the princes." Vishvamitra was listening to the words of Janak with a great deal of attention. A moment passed and then, with a sweet and gentle smile touching his lips, Vishvamitra said, "Child, Ram, go and look at the bow." Ram walked towards the casket. He opened the lid and stood staring at the magnificent bow. He stood gazing at it for a long moment. He then turned to the Rishi Vishvamitra and asked, "Great One, I will now touch this great bow with my hand. I will lift it and try to string it. May I do so?" "You may," said both the Rishi and the king. Everyone was tense with excitement since Ram spoke with so much confidence. Even as thousands of eyes were watching, Ram lifted the bow as though it were just a sport. There was an audible sigh from everyone when they saw him lift it easily with his left hand. Ram stood the bow straight and holding it with his left hand, he bent it with his right to string it. There was a noise like a clap of thunder, and those who were watching saw the great bow of Mahadev break into two. The earth trembled at the noise and most of the people around fell down senseless. Vishvamitra, Janak and the princes were the only 4 unaffected by the noise. When they had all recovered and when there was a semblance of normalcy restored, Janak spoke words of great sweetness and words suited to the occasion. He said, "I still cannot believe that this had happened. I have never seen the like of it before. This Ram is the greatest among men. My dear daughter Seeta is fortunate to become the bride of the house of the Ikshvakus. I had announced that I would give her to the hero who will string the bow, and Ram has done it. Permit me, my lord, to send messages to Ayodhya. Let them relate to the monarch about the incidents here, and let the king know how his son won the hand of my daughter. Let him be told that the princes are still under your care, and let him be entreated to come to Mithila as early as he possibly can." Vishvamitra was only too happy to say, "Do so by all means." Messengers were sent to Ayodhya on fleet horses, and they hurried to the great city with the glad tidings that Ram had broken the great bow of Mahadev and that Seeta, the daughter of Janak, was to be his bride. 29. Dasharath leaves for Mithila. 3 days and 3 nights had to pass before the messengers could reach Ayodhya. They reached the palace of the king and told the doorkeepers, "We have come from Mithila, and we have a message for the king. Please take us to his presence." They went to the king, and after saluting him in a manner befitting a monarch, they spoke to him and said, "Great One, Janak, the king of Mithila, sends his regards to your gracious self, and wants to know if all is well with you and your kingdom. He asks again and again after your welfare, and that of your subjects. He now wants you to listen to a request of his, which has been approved and sanctioned by the great Rishi, Vishvamitra. These are his words: I have a daughter by name Seeta. I had announced to the world that she is a Varyasukha. None of the kings who came were able to satisfy the stipulations which I had laid down. That daughter of mine has been won over now by your blessed son, who was brought to me by Vishvamitra. It is my good fortune that Ram, your eldest son, should be my son-in-law. In the presence of several rishis, kings and citizens, the great divine vow of Mahadev was broken by your noble son. According to my promise, Seeta, my daughter, will be given to him as a prize for his prowess. Please accept my gift and honor me. Please come to Mithila as early as possible accompanied by your preceptors. Your sons are eager to be reunited with you. You must be gracious enough to let me keep my promise and let me give my child to your son. The messengers continued. Advised by the sage Vishvamitra, and by his own Guru Sadananda, our king has asked us to convey to you this message. Please let us also add our entreaties, and request you to come to our city. They waited eagerly for the king's reply. Dasharath, happy beyond words, looked at Vashisht and Vamdev and the other ministers in the court and said, So the children have gone to Videha with Vishvamitra. As you have all heard, Ram's prowess has won the admiration of everyone. Janak is eager to perform the wedding as early as possible. If you are agreeable to it, we will, at once, leave for Mithila. Let us not lose time. There was nothing but happiness in the hearts of everyone in Ayodhya. It was decided to leave for Mithila early in the morning. The tired messengers from Mithila were duly honored and they spent the night peacefully. 30. In Mithila. When the east was tinted red heralding the approach of dawn, the royal entourage left for Mithila. The king had asked his treasurer to take as many jewels and gold with him as was necessary for the occasion. These were the gifts which a king naturally carried with him when he went to meet another king. In this instance there was also the proposed marriage of his eldest son. Chariots and palanquins to carry the members of the royal family were ready. The many preceptors led by Vashisht were already on their way. The king ascended the chariot and the journey was on. It took them 4 days to reach Mithila. Even as they were nearing the gates of the city, King Janak hurried forward to greet the old and venerable king, surrounded as he was by his kinsmen and the rishis who were his preceptors. He spoke to the king of Kosala and said, It is gracious on your part to have acceded to my request and to have come to my city. You must honor me by accepting my hospitality. I have been honored by the coming of Vashisht, and he is accompanied by great rishis like Vamdev and Markandeya. Your son, O king, has made my dream come true. He has saved me from breaking my oath about the proper man who should wed my child. The yugna is nearly at an end. At the conclusion of the yugna you should permit that the wedding of your son with my child takes place. Dasharath, with his face lit up with a smile of contentment, said, Receiving of a gift depends entirely on the giver, Janak. There is no need for me to tell you when the marriage should take place. You and your preceptors will know. Janak led them to the palace set apart for them. The rishis had all assembled there for the sake of the yugna, and the great Vashisht with Vamdev, and the renowned Markandeya were honored by all of them. Tender was the reunion of Ram and Lakshman with their father. For the sake of propriety the king had refrained from rushing to Ram when he saw him. Now they were alone, the king shed tears of joy and embraced them again and again. The night was spent happily with the princes recounting to their father about the many happenings during their stay with Vishvamitra. Janak, as was the custom, spent the night in the Yugnasala. Early in the morning the king of Mithila became engrossed in the yugna, which had almost neared completion. The Ritviks surrounded the Vedika and the rites were performed without any disturbance or interruption or lapse to mar its perfection. Janak then spoke to his own preceptor Sadananda, the son of Gautam, and said, As you know, I have a brother by name Kushvaha who is ruling over the city by name Sankashya. The city has the sweet river Ikshamati flowing near her. I wish to send for him, and let him share the joy of this happy occasion with me. Sadananda at once sent messengers to bring Kushvaha to Mithila. Soon he came, and when they had all assembled in the great hall, Janak asked his chief minister Sudama to go to the presence of King Dasharath, and bring him to the court along with his sons. When the old king arrived there with Ram and Lakshman, Janak with his brother went towards them, and with folded palms, greeted them, and led them to the jeweled seats set apart for them. Dasharath then said, Janak, my friend, my preceptor Vashisht will perform everything in the proper manner. It is the custom to relate the ancestry of the young man who is to be married, and I now request Guru Vashisht to do the needful. Kula Guru Vashisht traced the line of Manu, elaborating on the greatness of kings like Ikshvaku, who was the first to rule in the city of Ayodhya. He then spoke of Trishanku, the famed Yuvanashva, his son Mandhata, who was called the jewel of Krita Yuga, King Sagar, Bhagirath, Kakastha, Raghu, and down to Aya, whose son was the present King Dasharath. He said, "You have heard about the glorious story of this dynasty. Please be gracious enough to give your daughter in marriage to Ram, the son of Dasharath." Janak said, "I would also like to tell you something about the glorious men who were my ancestors, who have shed glory on our heritage." He spoke of their first king Nimai and his son Mithi, after whom the city was called Mithila. The recital went on. King after king was mentioned and his glorious achievements. The king by name Svarnaroma was the father of Janak, who had 3 brothers. Janak concluded, "I now ask you to accept my daughter Seeta as the bride of your eldest son Ram, and my other child, Urmila, as the bride for Lakshman." He added, "Please make all the many preparations which are religious for these 2 young men, and 3 days from today, when the star is in Uttara Falguni, let the marriages be performed." Vishvamitra spoke to Janak and said, "Janak, the alliances which you have proposed are indeed very good, and we are all immensely pleased with it. I have a suggestion to make. I have been told that this brother of yours Kushvaha has 2 beautiful daughters. I ask you on behalf of the king of Ayodhya to give them in marriage to Bharat and Shatrughan, the other sons of the king. May the 2 great houses be inextricably bound by these alliances." The entire hall was filled with words of praise for the suggestion of Vishvamitra, and the old King Dasharath returned to his palace with a glad heart. 31. Seeta Kalyanam. On the morning of the day fixed for the wedding, King Dasharath, surrounded by his entire host, arrived in the hall which had been set apart for the wedding. The princes stood with their father, and Vashisht was the officiating priest. He smiled at Janak and said, "King Dasharath, accompanied by his sons, is here, and they have been prepared for the solemn ceremony. They are wearing the scared kankanas on their wrists, and please hasten to perform the Kanyadana, which is said to benefit the giver and the one who receives." Janak, with the rishis Vishvamitra and Sadananda to guide him, purified and decorated the platform set for the marriage by offering flowers and incense and other symbols of prosperity. These were the rites prescribed in the Vedas. He then kindled the sacred fire with incantations. Janak brought Seeta. Words were inadequate to describe the beauty of Seeta. She looked like the goddess Lakshmi, who had walked out of the lotus on which she resides, as though she had left the presence of Narayan and come down to the earth. She was as bright and beautiful as a flash of lightning. Large eyes like lotus petals were cast down, and her hair, which was long and dark, was decked with flowers and with gems. She was wearing jewels, and her dress was of the color of gold with an edging of gold which was woven as though swans were strung together. She walked slowly with her father. Janak brought her to the presence of Ram and said, "This Seeta, my daughter, will be, from now, yours. She will walk in the path of dharma with you. Accept her. Take her hand in yours, and may you both be blessed. She is a Pativrat, a great personage, and she will be like a shadow unto you." Janak then poured water into the hands of Ram, and thus made the gift complete, the gift of his beloved daughter to the greatest among men. When the waters touched the hands of Ram, divine music could be heard from the heavens, and the Devas showered flowers on the newlyweds. Janak then went to Lakshman and gave his other daughter Urmila to him and said, "Lakshman, accept my daughter as your spouse. Take her hand in yours and make her yours." Bharat and Shatrughan took the hands of the princesses Mandavi and Sritakirti, and the sight was glorious, the 4 young men with their brides making pradakshina to the fire and taking the 7 steps, which is an essential rite. The excitement of the wedding was over, and the night was spent in happiness. Early in the morning Vishvamitra went to the palace where the young princes were. He took affectionate farewell of them and proceeded to the north, to the Himavan and the banks of Kaushiki, where he always stayed. 32. Parshuram, the Bhargav. After the departure of Vishvamitra, Dasharath went to the king of Mithila, and, taking leave of him, began his journey back to Ayodhya with his sons and their brides. Janak went with them for some distance, and returned to his city while Dasharath continued his journey. As they proceeded towards Ayodhya, the king observed ill omens on the way. Birds were making strange noises, and it was fearsome. They were flying hither and thither as though in panic. The animals were also signifying that something terrible was about to happen. Dasharath was naturally upset by these and asked Vashisht what these omens foreboded. The rishi thought for a while and said, "Dasharath, something fearful is approaching us. There is no doubt about it. Since the birds are afraid, it is evident. But the animals which are running in the right direction, that is, making pradakshina, means that the fear will be removed and no great harm will befall you. Be rid of this fear. It will pass, whatever is to come." Even as they were talking, a sudden gale blew across the sky, and it seemed to make the earth tremble. It was like a whirlwind. The sun was covered with darkness, and the quarters seemed to be covered by dust. Nothing could be visible. There was an unknown fear in the heart of every one of the men in the army of the king, and Dasharath was extremely worried as to why this was happening. Out of the darkness and the cloak of dust there came towards them a glorious figure. He was wearing the garb of an ascetic, and his hair was matted like the locks of Lord Mahadev himself. This was Parshuram, the Bhargav, Parshuram, who would strike nothing but terror in the hearts of the Kshatriyas, since he was known to be a hater of Kshatriyas. He was as fearful as the great fire which licks up the earth at the end of time, and he was an awe-inspiring personage like the peak of Mount Kailash. He was so radiant that they were all dazzled by him. On his shoulder rested the famed axe which got him the name Parshuram. His hands held a glorious bow, and he was like Lord Mahadev, who was setting out to kill the Tripuras. When they saw him, the rishis led by Vashisht placed their palms together and greeted him with reverence. Their minds were filled with misgivings, since this hater of Kshatriyas was in the midst of the scions of a famed line of Kshatriyas. They thought to themselves, "Bhargav has already completed his tarpan to his father with the blood of the Kshatriyas, and we have been told that he has abandoned his anger and his hatred of the Kshatriyas. And so there may not be any danger to the king or to his sons. But then, why this anger which sits like a thunder cloud on his noble brow?" They offered aragya to the guest, and he accepted it. He went to Ram and said, "Ram, I have been hearing about your prowess with the bow and arrow. People have been talking of nothing else. I was also told about your visit to Mithila, and about your breaking the sacred bow of Lord Mahadev. I am curious to know how great is this power and prowess of yours which people are talking about. I have, therefore, brought another bow to test you." Parshuram held out the bow which he had been holding in his hands and said, "This bow belonged to my father, the noble Jamadagni. Everyone is afraid even to touch this bow. Let me see you lift it, string it, and shoot an arrow with it. Then and only then will I believe the stories I have been hearing about you. If you are able to do so, to do what I have stipulated, I will then consider you to be a worthy opponent, and we can fight a duel. If, however, you are afraid, then accept that you have been defeated by me. You should either accept my superiority or fight with me." Bhargav stood with his eyes blazing, and to the old king, he looked like an avenging fury, all set to kill his beloved Ram. With his face pale with fear, the king said, "I have been told that your anger against Kshatriyas has been appeased, and that your hatred is now like a fire which has been extinguished. Why then this anger? My son should be left unharmed, for my sake. I beg you to spare my child to me. You have promised to Indra that you would lay down your arms. You did so, and went to live in the mountain by name Mahendra. Why then have you assumed this angry look? If Ram, my child, is killed, that will be the end of all of us. You have, evidently, come to destroy the entire family of Dasharath." Parshuram paid no heed to the piteous pleadings of Dasharath. He was looking only at Ram, and he said, "These two bows were made at the same time by Vishvakarma. They are great bows, famed throughout the 3 worlds. They are firm, strong, and it is not possible for ordinary mortals to handle them. One of these was given to Mahadev, the THREED god, and the other was offered to Narayan. What I am holding in my hands is the bow of Narayan. It has never known defeat. It is as famed as the bow of Mahadev. Once the Devas wanted to know who was more powerful, Mahadev or Narayan. They went to Brahma, the creator, and he sowed the seed of dissension between the two gods. A thrilling fight ensued between Narayan and Mahadev. Narayan sent the Astra by name Jairamhana at Mahadev, and with his bow slightly broken, the Lord Mahadev was nonplussed for a moment. But he resumed the fight. The Devas regretted their curiosity and appeased the angry gods and made them stop their fight. Mahadev left his bow with the ancestors of Janak, and that was the bow which was broken by you. The other bow was given to the Rishi Richaka, who gave it to his son Jamadagni, who was my father. I inherited it from my father, who was killed by Kartavarya, the Kshatriya, who was swollen with pride. It was with this bow that I killed innumerable kings, Kshatriyas, and avenged the death of my father. I was the possessor of the entire earth at one time. I performed the tarpan for my father, and then a yugna to rid me of the sin of killing so many anointed kings. At the end of the yugna I gave away the entire earth to Kashyap, and ever since then I have been spending my time on the Mahendra mountain with my mind bent on tapas. I heard the celestials praise you and your prowess, and that prompted me to come down to the plains to accost you. If you are a real Kshatriya, accept my challenge and string this bow as I suggest. If you do that, you can then be fit enough to fight with me. I concede that. Ram was standing silent during the entire harangue of the angry Parshuram. He looked reassuringly at his father and then addressed Parshuram, Bhargav, I heard you, and I heard your challenge also. I will only be too happy to accept your challenge. You seem to be under the impression that I am a weak man, who has not courage enough to fight with you. You have insulted me. I will show you how powerful my arms are, and how much of a Kshatriya I am. Ram held out his hand, and casually he took the bow from the hands of Parshuram. He strung the bow and fixed an arrow to it. He then said, Bhargav, Vishvamitra is my beloved guru, and I respect him immensely. He was very fond of his sister Satyavati, and your father happens to be her son. And because of your kinship with him, and because you are a Brahmin, respect is due to you from me. That is the sole reason why I am not trying to aim this arrow at your life. No arrow of mine has ever come back to me without getting some victim. Tell me, what will you give me to satisfy this arrow from this bow? This bow, as you have told me, is powerful since it is sacred to Narayan, and it is not right that I should let the arrow go unappeased. Tell me what you will give this arrow. Will it be the wealth of all the tapas you have performed, or the world to come which you have earned? Tell me, and I will aim my arrow to get me that. As was their custom, the divine host headed by Brahma himself had assembled in the skies to watch the encounter between the two Rams. Parshuram felt strength ebbing away from his limbs, and he spoke in halting words. He said, I have realized that you are superior to me, Ram. I will, this very moment, return to Mahendra where I will dwell forever. I will grant you the wealth of my tapas which I have accumulated. When you took up the bow in your blessed hands I realized that you are Narayan himself. I have been vanquished and, strangely enough, it is not galling to my pride to accept defeat at your hands. When Parshuram spoke these words Ram released the arrow from the bow. Parshuram went back to the mountain by name Mahendra after having abandoned his tapas and his strength to Ram. The heavens rejoiced when Parshuram made a pradakshina to Ram, and walked away from there toward the north where Mahendra was. It took a while for Ram to control his anger. When his wrath was appeased, Ram gave the bow to Varun, the lord of oceans. Ram then spoke to his father, Come, father, Parshuram has been sent back by me, and we can continue our journey towards Ayodhya. Dasharath, who had been in a daze all the while, roused himself, and with great joy embraced his beloved child, Ram. They came to Ayodhya, and the citizens welcomed them with great excitement and happiness. Music sounded everywhere, and the king and his sons with their brides entered the palace of the king. Ram was the ideal son to his father. He would ever be attentive to the slightest wish of the king, and would obey him even before the king mentioned it. He was the beloved of everyone in Ayodhya. Sita and Ram were an extremely devoted couple. Sita was the ideal wife for Ram. She was his equal in beauty, in her modesty, and in her love for the elders. She was very dear to Ram. Each dwelt in the heart of the other, and her beauty and his were like those of Lakshmi and Narayan, and they lived happily in the city of Ayodhya.